Please be seated as the forum will begin shortly. You are kindly reminded to stand upon the arrival of the Speaker of the Dewan Rakyat as announced by the MC, and please remain standing for the national anthem Negaraku, as well as to turn off or put your mobile devices in silent mode. We will also appreciate if you could limit any movements throughout the forum. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I repeat, please be seated as the forum will begin shortly. Thank you. announcing the arrival of His Excellency Datuk Muhammad Arif bin Mat Yusof, Speaker of the Dewan Rakyat. Please remain standing for the national anthem, Negaraku. Please be seated. His Excellency Datuk Muhammad Arif bin Mat Yusof, Speaker of the Dewan Rakyat, Honorable Datuk Haji Muhammad Rashid bin Hasnun, Deputy Speaker of the Dewan Rakyat, Tan Sri Michael Yeo, President of Kingsley Strategic Institute, Datuk Rosmi binti Hamzah, Secretary of the Dewan Rakyat, Ms. Marcela Suazo, United Nations Population Fund, representative for Malaysia and Thailand, and UN Resident Coordinator at Interim Malaysia, Ms. Boy Koh, CEO of QI Malaysia, Your Excellencies, Honorable Members of Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. Welcome to the National Forum on Sustainability, CSR and SDG 2019. With the theme of reimagining sustainability and strengthening partnership, this forum is held in conjunction with the first anniversary of the 14th Parliament of Malaysia. Without further ado, I would like to invite Tan Sri Michael Yeo to give the welcoming remarks. Thank you. Please welcome.
Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Muhammad Arif, Tuan Yang di-Pertua Dewan Rakyat, Yang Berhormat Datuk Muhammad Rashid Hasnun, Timbalan Yang di-Pertua Dewan Rakyat, The Honourable Mrs. Marcelo Suaza, UN Resident Representative at Interim, Yang Berbahagia Datuk Rosmi, Secretary of Parliament, Ms. Boy Koh, representing our sponsor, QI Group, ahli-ahli yang berhormat, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang saya hormati. Very good morning and welcome to all of you to this August House. Thanks to the Honourable Speaker for granting us the opportunity to hold this forum in Parliament. It is indeed a great honor for us, and once again, I would like to thank the Honourable Datuk Muhammad Arif, Speaker of Parliament, for allowing us to be present here today. Also, I would like to thank the United Nations Malaysia Office and the CSO SDG Alliance for working together with us in co-organizing today's forum. It is apt and timely to reflect on SDGs, as last week in New York, the high-level political forum on the SDGs is going on, and I think the meeting is still continuing this week. And our co-chairman of the CSO SDG Alliance, Dr. Dennison, is attending that meeting in New York. I must also congratulate the Honorable Speaker and the House Committee for thinking about establishment of an all-party parliamentary group on the SDGs. We look forward, to Speaker, on the approval for the setting up of this new committee. The SDGs, as we all know, are all-encompassing, covering 17 key goals to help develop a more inclusive and sustainable world. And in particular, for parliamentarians, perhaps we should emphasize SDG number 16, focusing on peace, justice, and strong institutions. And for all of us on SDG 17, securing partnerships for the goals. Our various civil society organizations here at today's forum have been involved in championing various goals, various of these 17 SDGs. I want to thank the CSOs for their commitment and their dedication in supporting the SDGs. We also hope today's forum can get the business sector to reflect on how they can also contribute to the SDGs, because increasingly we see many companies moving their CSR programs to be more supportive of the SDGs. Perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, during the course of our forum today, we can also take into consideration the importance of the 4 Ps to actualize the SDGs. The 4 Ps are peace, prosperity, people, and planet. And increasingly, we've added the 5th P on partnerships. So these are, I think, the key 5 Ps now between government, parliamentarians, business, and society that will help us move forward to achieve the SDGs. Once again, I would like to thank Dr. Speaker for allowing us to hold this forum here and for hosting the forum in Parliament. Thank you also to all our many speakers for your participation today. Thank you to the QI Group for supporting this forum, and thank you to all of you for your participation. Sekian, terima kasih.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Now, I would like to call upon His Excellency, Datuk Muhammad Arif bin Mat Yusof, to deliver the opening keynote address. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dan salam sejahtera. A very good morning to everyone present here today in the so-called August Hall. But let me just start by saying that this is not the real parliament. This is not the chamber where we carry on our debates and so on and so forth. This is the temporary chamber which was erected when the current chamber was undergoing renovation. But otherwise, it's the same. The sitting arrangements, the ambience, whatever. So they were using this for a few years prior to the renovation work being completed. That's by way of a brief introduction, and also welcome to the Parliament of Malaysia, to everyone who has not been here before. So let me start with the salutations. Yang berhormat Datuk Haji Rashid Hasnon, Deputy Speaker of the Dewan Rakyat, or as we see in Malaysia, the equivalent of the House of Representatives elsewhere. Yang berhormat Tuan Nga Koming, I think he'll be coming in a moment, another Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Michael Yeo, President of Kingley Strategic Institute. Yang berbahagia Datuk Kamis Samin, Chief Administrator of the Parliament of Malaysia. Yang berbahagia Datuk Rusmi Hamzah, Secretary of the House of Representatives. Elsewhere, Secretary is known as Clerk of the House. Here is the Secretary of the House of Representatives. Ms. Marcela Suazo from the United Nations Population Fund and representative for Malaysia and Thailand, and UN Resident Coordinator at Interim for Malaysia. Ms. Boy Koo, CEO of QL Malaysia, one of the co-organizers for this forum. And to shorten the salutations, otherwise it will take too long. Honorable members of Parliament and distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is, of course, a pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to all of you today. I'm also very pleased to be given this opportunity to address this National Forum on Sustainability, CSR and SDG 2019, jointly organized by Kingsley Strategic Institute and the Parliament of Malaysia, in association with the Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance and the United Nations Malaysia. We are indeed very glad to be a co-organizer. We have done this a number of times over the last 1 year, and we plan to keep it this way so that Parliament now becomes a place where we can engage with the public at large and to include even an international audience. Because I believe that's the only way to go in a maturing democracy or maturing parliamentary state, or whatever term we choose to call it. So ladies and gentlemen, we live in an extraordinary age. In almost every aspect of our lives, old structures are breaking down as we witness unfolding impacts brought about by technological innovation. Are widening. Absolute poverty coexists with extreme wealth. The gap in income among the rich, middle class, and poor in Malaysia has widened. To take one example, in the heart of Kuala Lumpur, a report by UNICEF in 2017 indicated that 99.7% of children living in Project Perumahan Rakyat, this is the low-cost flats built by the authorities. So 99.7% of children living in the PPRs live in relative poverty and 7% in absolute poverty, whereas the average urban poverty is only 0.2%. 22% of these children are stunted, almost 2 times higher compared with the Kuala Lumpur average. So I'm told within the vicinity of the PPR, you will likely find a cup of coffee in Starbucks, priced at 10 ringgit Malaysia, to cater for the elitists. The reality is the most vulnerable and marginalized are living amongst us. So despite the shiny facade that you see sometimes, there are still pockets of poverty which will require to be addressed. And I think it's not only peculiar to Malaysia, it's peculiar to most jurisdictions too. We can also relate whatever is happening to the recent death of 16 Batik nomadic tribes people, or the Orang Asal, Orang Asli at Kuala Ko. In the list of the dead, along with adults, were 3 children, one just 6 months old. So it's quite devastating. Here we are in the digital age, basic needs are still not met. The marginalization of the Orang Asli has left them in abject poverty. So the poor women and the children, Orang Asli, Orang Asal, persons with disabilities, older persons, minority groups, stateless people, migrants are among the most advantaged groups in Malaysia. Often, these groups of people have poor access to education and health facilities. Its manifestations include hunger and malnutrition, limited access to education and other basic services, social discrimination of some sort, and exclusion and the lack of participation in decision-making. So unless effectual measures are taken, the vicious circle of poverty will remain and will be very difficult to break. Ladies and gentlemen, sustainable development has been at the heart of Malaysia's development approach since the 1970s. Economic growth must be inclusive to provide sustainable jobs and promote equality. Social protection systems need to be implemented to help the poor. The 11th Malaysia Plan aligns strategies and initiatives to support the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. The work in progress, as you would expect, would revolve around economic empowerment, environmental sustainability, and social re-engineering to realize our new development model for shared prosperity, which is a catchword in Malaysia, shared prosperity, in line with our efforts to attain the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Of course, in this development, members of parliament obviously have a bigger role to play of getting the people's voice heard in parliament and to the nation at large. One can take just an isolated example, for instance, the much touted 5G technology development. How will 5G affect the disabled? What can the indigenous people gain from e-commerce, or the marginalized gain from e-commerce, when sometimes they do not even have access to clean water or even electricity in the more remote areas of Malaysia. Yeah? So these are large issues, no doubt, but large issues in the context of SDG have to be properly contextualized to ensure that no one is left behind. We acknowledge there is still much to be done. We are committed to eradicate poverty for all. We have committed to ensure that all people can fulfill their potential in dignity and equality, peace and security. We take the challenges to leave no one behind, to reach those who are furthest behind first, by ending poverty in all its forms, reducing inequalities and discrimination, which often leads to the marginalization of certain populations. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn my attention to the role of parliamentary institutions, which is actually the main topic of my short, brief keynote address today. In many countries, oversight pursued by parliamentary committees and parliamentary caucuses require evidence from civil society organizations, academia, a range of private sector bodies and others. In some countries too, a broader institution beyond the more formal select/standing committees have been established. Take, for instance, the idea of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, the APPG. The British Parliament is undoubtedly a leader in this regard. As an informal mechanism, the scope of work of APPGs is not confined to mere formalities. It can be as wide as the boundaries of society. In bridging the gap between Parliament and the people, APPGs can rise above political divide and put the interests of the citizens first. I'm happy to state today that the Dewan Rakyat is seriously considering developing this idea. Indeed, as mentioned earlier by Tan Sri Michael, our House Committee has decided, in fact, and agreed in principle to establish APPGs in Malaysia. And when all procedural formalities are finalized, the first APPG, the Malaysian APPG, will be the APPG on SDG. Yeah. There are tremendous mutually beneficial relationships when MPs partner with CSOs in APPGs. MPs have formal positions, constitutional powers to examine and act, but they may lack in-depth knowledge of policy areas that more specialized CSOs possess, or the special expertise and skills of external oversight institutions who are represented here also today. Most CSOs operate at grassroots level and thus, in general, have active engagement with local actors and communities. It is almost obligatory upon MPs to seek and maintain dialogue with a wide range of CSOs as a regular part of the parliamentary process. The existence of an active CSO organization is an essential element of democracy, quite often neglected by those who think parliament as just a formal setup, a nice building, nice procedures, but this aspect of of the parliamentary state is very important. The SDG Goal 17 underscores the importance of working in partnership with CSOs in its implementation. Members of APPGs with common interests can discuss the promotion of legislation and policies that reflect those interests. CSOs can be the bridge between Parliament and the public. It's about time we all recognize that. APPGs will complement, here in Malaysia, the function of our Special Select Committee. The APPGs are not envisaged as an official body of Parliament, but they have an equally important function. APPGs can, for instance, these are some of the functions and expectations, can shape the agenda by providing information and advocacy of certain common interests. They can raise awareness of an issue and function as a focal point for communication between government and CSOs. They can also act as a watchdog for specific issues, very important. They can also be an advocate on the legislative implications of law or policy. The work is not done by passing a bill through Parliament. You need to also look at the implications of the law amongst the citizenry and the population at large. They can also initiate gender-based or minority legislation, which are necessary sometimes, and they can ensure that legislation is enforced. Enforcement sometimes tend to be lacking in certain areas. So APPGs, in conjunction with CSOs, can highlight the points of weaknesses. Once formally formalized, each APPG will be required to register with the Secretary of the Dewan Rakyat. This is what we are intending to do. Guidelines on the formation of APPGs are already drawn up. So we're just waiting, as I said, for the formalities to be in order. And these guidelines are intended to enhance transparency and accountability. So among others, we will open the membership of the APPG to all members of the Dewan Rakyat and Dewan Negara. External organizations will be brought in, organizations such as the Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance. These organizations will be admitted as partners of the APPG. It's inclusive in that sense. The MPs lead, but you'll have partners to complement and fulfill the functions of a proper APPG. And each group, which is envisaged, will have a minimum of 5 members of Parliament on a cross-party basis. I must stress this point that in the new Malaysia, we work on the basis of cross-party so that we can lessen partisanship and work in the common interests of the nation at large. The chairperson must be a member of Parliament from the ruling party. The co-chairperson can be a member of Parliament from the opposition party. Yesterday we mentioned a term, the green sum currency. Instead of calling the opposition, we call them the minority group. And everyone seems to be excited about the idea. Anyway, as it stands now, from the opposition party, or it can be from the Senate or senator. So these are very flexible rules. So we also envisage that the location of the Secretariat office for the APPGs should be outside Parliament. You want to maintain formality and yet maintain some distance and informality. It's better for people to organize themselves, and it is better to our thinking that the Secretariat office be located outside Parliament. But you have to register with Parliament, but you do your work from a location outside Parliament. It's better. And each APPG will be expected to hold a minimum of 2 formal meetings per year. So these are the basic guidelines. We don't want to make it too formal. And I cannot claim ownership or originality over these guidelines. We borrow liberally from the UK. This is a tested system. So we tweak it a bit to make it workable in Malaysia. So institutionalizing APPGs, I believe, will be another start to a stronger Parliament in Malaysia. Measures, of course, should be taken to evaluate the effectiveness of the APPGs periodically by identifying priorities, outcome, and impact assessment. Aside from the SDGs, there are others who have come wanting to establish APPGs too in certain areas of common interest, and we welcome, whoever would like to be part of the development of APPGs in Malaysia. So in this way, the partnership with CSOs will lead to clearer actions and recommendations on policies and laws to enable Parliament to play a key role in putting in place the legislative framework reflective of putting the people's first concept. So once the APPGs are formally established in the Malaysian Parliament, it will also mark another step in the fulfillment of the Pakatan Harapan Manifesto, Promise number 16, which seeks, among others, to encourage greater collaboration and engagement between civil societies and Parliament. And I dare say, what better beginning can it be than to have an APPG dedicated to SDGs here as a starting point. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you again for taking your time off to be present here today, to participate in this forum. To me, this is a very important forum for Malaysia and for this region. So I wish everyone every success, and I certainly look forward to be here to listen to all the ideas that no doubt will be brought forth. And lastly, thank you. So, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Marcela Suazo to deliver her special address. Please welcome.
Yang di-Pertua Dato' Muhammad Arif bin Yusuf, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Parliament of Malaysia, and the Deputy Representative who is also present, Honorable Members of Parliament, Tan Sri Michael Yeo, President of Kingsley Strategic Institute, Excellencies, particularly the Diplomatic Corps who's present, I would like to acknowledge, distinguished guests, speakers, civil society, academia, and private sector partners who are present here. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, salam sejahtera, and allow me also to greet you in my own language, Spanish, muy buenos días. I would like to start saying that being in Asia for the first time after working in Latin America all of my life, has been a fresh air in my life, and particularly in Malaysia, and I want to share why. This is, of course, the first time the United Nations Population Fund, my agency, has an international representative in Malaysia. So we don't know a lot about Malaysia. We did not know a lot about Malaysia within our organization, but also across the agency in other regions. So when I arrived here, I was struck really by the level of development of Malaysia. This is the first thing that you see. But then I was struck how the different kind of ethnic groups could live peacefully, could share their different religious beliefs. They could share their cultures. The Malaysian culture is a culture made of all of these groups, the lives, the lifestyles, and the people that has built this nation. And that doesn't happen in many countries of the world. So I was really struck and amazed on how this nation can be built. Of course, there are things that you continue discussing, but this nation has been built with the effort of everybody. And the third thing, then working, as I started working, elections were coming. And the Speaker of the House just mentioned about the quality of the democracy and the efforts that Malaysia is doing to enhance the participation of everyone and the quality of that democracy, how it can be improved. And it is true that the only way to improve democracy is by listening to everyone, by allowing everyone to participate, but also by listening to those that have no voice, by listening to those that are usually in those groups that are left behind. But I've been struck by the strong commitment that you have, not only from the government, because governments usually have a responsibility to fulfill, but by the people, the civil society. You have a vibrant civil society, very strong, very powerful, well-developed, and I think that they play a unique role in Malaysia, and you do not see that in all of the countries of the world. But also, I have been struck for the commitment of the private sector. The private sector in many countries is not necessarily interested in common development, but is interested in the return of their investment. And for me particularly, being here with you today, on behalf of my colleague Stefan, who is the resident coordinator of the United Nations, it is truly an honor to see this initiative and to accompany this initiative. Actually, your presence here today, representatives of all different parties, but also civil society and representatives of the private sector, is the clear image, as the Speaker of the representatives of the House of Representatives was telling us. This is the clear image of how Malaysia would like to, the new Malaysia would like to move forward. The Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in 2015, as you know. There was a first attempt, the Millennium Development Goals, that were agreed in 2000. I don't know if you have heard of Michelle Bachelet, who was at a certain time President of Chile, who was also the Executive Director for UN Women at the United Nations, and who is today the head of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights. And about the SDGs, she said, the good thing about the Millennium Development Goals is that all of the world was able to come together and decide for common goals, for a common agenda. That was the first time that really the world could come together and decide for a development agenda. But she talked about the quality of the MDGs. And I think this is the added value of the SDGs. The SDGs really place the people at the center of development and really allows for everyone, everywhere, to participate in the development and the sustainable goals. It is a vision that balances the economic growth, the social inclusion, the environmental protection that we really need for peaceful societies. I believe that my region, Latin America, is a perfect example that you may grow as Latin America grew more than 8%, even 11% for a decade, but that did not reduce the inequalities. In fact, in many countries, poverty has been exacerbated. So when we grow, we also need to think how to distribute that growth in a way that everyone can access to the benefits of this growth. As we heard here today, the Speaker of the House gave us an example of pockets of poverty or challenges that we still have. And as we see how the wealthy groups coexist with the ones that live in poverty, that means that we need to make an effort on how we can have this shared prosperity and ensure that we leave no one behind. And I think that one of the strongest messages that we get from the Sustainable Development Goals is that we must leave no one behind. This is the only way that we will ensure generational justice. We must recognize that the poverty agenda is still unfinished. But we need to recognize that there are other areas that require our immediate attention. For example, the environment, which is in dire need of very urgent attention and repair, given its particular precarious stage. I would like to talk a little bit about the 2019 Global Report on the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the messages that we get is that the response is still insufficient. The global response is still not where it should be. Therefore, many of the targets are not on track. We can say that progress has been achieved in certain areas. Reduction of extreme poverty is one area, and it's a very important one. The widespread immunization, the decrease in child mortality rates, and the increase in people's access, for example, to power and electricity. But all of the targets of the 2030 Agenda will not be achieved if we do not make decisions. Decisions like this one you are making today, but decisions also to implement, to step up of efforts, to look for innovative solutions, to make new partnerships, to commit and to engage. We are not talking about the life of the future generations. We are talking about the life of us today. We don't have to wait long to see what is happening to the world. I would also like to say that you have 28% of young population between the ages of 10 and 24 years old. That is exactly the group of people in Malaysia that are going to be facing the two greatest challenges that are coming for the world and for Malaysia. One of them, they will need to acquire the skills necessary to compete in the 4.0 Industrial Revolution. And all of this transformation on the way we live and the way we work, and the work we are hired, and the work we commerce. But on the other side, they will also be faced with the need to support the aging population. So your cohort of people, of young people, these 28% of young people between the ages of 10 and 24 years old today are the ones that are going to be facing very soon these two challenges, and we need to pay attention to also to that group. So we are not only talking about pockets of poverty, but we are also talking about the groups of people that are also an opportunity. We will not be able to take advantage of this opportunity if they leave the country. Malaysia has been seen globally as a successful story of development. There is your rapid reduction of poverty is an example for the world. The rolling out of your inclusive programs is also. So sometimes it is very good to learn from others. As you were saying, we are bringing this from UK because it has been proven. So Malaysia can also share these examples with the rest of the world because they have been proven to work. However, the Sustainable Development Goals come with new challenges because we're not talking about averages, but we're talking about disaggregated data. We're talking about where are these people. And yes, as we heard, there is a responsibility of parliamentarians, and parliamentarians know a lot because they are politicians and they go and they listen to their constituencies. But it is a commitment that we all have, not only the parliamentarians, not only the politicians, not only the government programs, but if we unite ourselves, the civil society organizations who really know at the grassroots what's going on, and that they also have a lot of information and a lot of solutions that they have proven, but also the business sector that have a strong commitment and that can commit in order to move these indicators, not particularly or exclusively with corporate social responsibility for small projects, but committing to a larger targets achievement. Today, at this moment, Malaysia is working on setting the agenda for the 12th National Development Plan. And we are very honored and very happy to see their efforts to align these national development plans to the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is also in coherence with what we are seeing here today at Parliament. The United Nations country team, and I am happy to say we are 10 agencies present here in Malaysia, but we have another group of agencies working for Malaysia from our regional hub in Bangkok. We are working on 22 policy advisory papers, which are going to be handed over as contribution for the thinking of the government in selecting their priorities. All of these papers are aligned to the human rights platform, but also aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals. This is part of our comprehensive cooperation, part of the transformation of the United Nations, the UN reform that we are exercising since January, 1st of January this year, 2019, trying to bring all of the agencies together to provide a comprehensive approach and support to the priorities of the countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I remember a few years ago when we were talking with the private sector in Latin America, why it was important to invest in education and in the quality of education. And I think the private sector have a huge role to play, not only because they will need to hire staff that will have the qualities and the skills necessary for the production for them to remain in the market. But on the other hand, because they are part of those communities, their staff and their workers are part of those communities, so they also have an interest in making this community grow. Therefore, you have a huge role in participating in the Sustainable Development Goals and how we can concert our efforts to advance together, both in the priorities of the government, with the advisory of the civil society organizations, and with the effort and the strong commitment of the private sector. Looking at Malaysia, there is a huge role of the private sector. 55% of the GDP is contributed by the service sector. 58% of employment is generated by the small and the medium enterprises. Malaysia is among the 3 top contributors to direct investment in Africa, to foreign direct investment in Africa. And 78% of energy consumption is by the private sector. So this is how the big footprint that we see of the private sector in Malaysia is really very strong. So we believe that the private sector can contribute in 3 ways. First of all, private sector has grown generously, I would say, in their social responsibility programs, corporate social responsibility programs. And they try to address individually, as guided by their boards, particular challenges and situations, whether in education or in health or in areas that they believe is a priority. So we believe that if we unite around the Sustainable Development Goals, these corporate social responsibility investments will have probably a major impact in achieving the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. The second way in which they could really participate in this and provide a strong support is by contributing with innovation and the business interventions that directly promote the achievement of the SDGs. We need to also bring the people to know about the SDGs and those innovative technologies will be able to reach out much further, or particularly those pockets of population that, to ensure that no one is left behind. And the third one is by aligning your own business processes and your working modalities to the SDGs. For example, on decent work standards, reducing the carbon footprint, etc. So you will be able to anticipate a change that will come through moving the needle on the global economy. I just want to close by saying that we are working together on the Together SDG Hub. We expect that we will have there a platform to establish the commitments of the private sector around certain SDGs and to reach the targets, but also bringing the civil society organizations and ones that are providing the solutions at the ground so that we can really match the demand and the offer, and we can together make more corporate integrated approaches. And finally, the words of our Secretary General, open quotation, "It is abundantly clear that a much deeper, faster, and more ambitious response is needed to unleash the social and economic transformation needed to achieve the 2030 goals," unquote. I wish you a fruitful discussion. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Ms. Marcela Suazo. Before we continue with our next agenda, I would like to call upon His Excellency Datuk Muhammad Arif bin Mat Yusof to present a token of appreciation to our strategic partner, Ms. Boy Ko. May I invite Ms. Boy to the front to receive the token of appreciation. Please welcome. Thank you, Your Excellency, and I would like to ask Your Excellency to remain at the front. Now, I would like to call upon Tan Sri Michael Yeo to present a memento to His Excellency Datuk Muhammad Arif bin Mat Yusof. Please welcome. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Tan Sri. Now, I would like to invite our distinguished guests and participants for a group photo session at the center. May I repeat? I would like to also invite our participants to join the group photo session. Thank you. As we are going to start with our next agenda, I would like to ask the distinguished guests and participants to return to your seat. I repeat, kindly return to your seat as we would like to start with our next agenda shortly. Thank you. Before we start with our forum, with the first session, I would like to invite Tan Sri Datuk Dr. Omar Abdul Rahman to do a special presentation entitled Global Goals, National Priorities, Institutional Programs, and Implementation Metrics for the SDGs. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dan salam sejahtera. Yang berhormat Datuk Muhammad Arif bin Muhammad Yusof, Speaker Dewan Rakyat. Yang berhormat Deputy Speaker, Miss Marcela Suzo, UNFPA representative for Malaysia and Thailand, Tan Sri Michael Yeo, President of KSI, Excellencies, ahli-ahli yang berhormat, distinguished guests and speakers, ladies and gentlemen. I must thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to share some views on what I call global goals, national priorities, institutional programs, and to suggest a simple approach for implementation. Because without implementation, SDG becomes only beautiful reports and exciting rhetorics. The 2030 UN Agenda for Sustainable Development is a plan of action for, as they say, for people, for planet, and for prosperity, covering the three dimensions of sustainable development: the economic, the social, and the environmental. And we have heard already that the delivery of the SDG requires participation of all the 193 member states of the UN. Both the SDG and its predecessor, the Millennium Development Goal, emphasize partnership for the goals. Goal 17 of the SDG calls for partnership, cooperation, collaboration, to develop and apply technologies, and to apply social organization. I would posit that effective and meaningful cooperation by developing countries can only happen in areas where global goal coincides with national priorities, which are based on national priorities which are based on national aspiration and implemented at institutional level. Therefore, global goal, national priorities, and institutional programs. Identifying the common ground for global goals and national priorities is therefore important. So let us explore what might be the common ground for global goals and national priorities. In Malaysia, or rather national priorities are determined by national aspiration, often elaborated as national development program or national socio-economic transformation program. We've had a few of national aspiration in Malaysia over the years, starting with Rukun Negara, and then Vision 2020, One Malaysia, Transformation Nasional, TN50, and the latest one, of course, Shared Prosperity. Now, without going into detail any of those, whatever ways those national aspirations that I have mentioned have been articulated, our national aspiration over the years can be interpreted simply as aspiring for Malaysia to be a harmonious, prosperous, progressive, and sustainable nation, HPPS. And I don't think this is an antithesis to any political ideology in Malaysia. Now, what are the requirements for harmony? First of all, there is the social, cultural, or spiritual components, which is about trust, respect, transparency, tolerance, compassion, empathy, about working together, understanding and respecting each other, living together. What I would like to call a harmony, musra environment and way of life. Over and above that, harmony requires citizens meeting their basic needs: water, electricity, energy, shelter, basic education, primary health care, and so on and so forth. And of course, continuing improvement of their quality of life, a higher level of basic needs. What would be the requirements for prosperity? It is about, of course, gainful employment, equitable income distribution derived from a robust, high-income, innovation-driven private sector-led economy. And the requirement for progressive, simply being an active part of the present and an influential part of the future on the global stage, and being future-aware and future-ready. And the requirement for sustainability is awareness, comprehension, understanding why and what, commitment, and action, which means translating that into actionable, sustainable practices by everybody. Now, what are the overall requirements for HPPS? Harmony, prosperity, progressive, and sustainable. There are the four major enablers, of course: the political commitment, the economic, the sociological, and the scientific and technological. And the scientific and technological can be translated into just 4 critical technologies: technologies for meeting basic needs, technologies for improving quality of life, technologies for economic development, and technologies for good governance. Now, let's see where global goals meets national priorities. Global goals, if you look at the blue side, the global goals or global aspiration, you see SDG 2016 to 2030 is labeled as UN Agenda 2030, transforming our world, which can be interpreted as socio-economic transformation at the global level based on global aspiration for sustainable development covering the 3 dimensions: economic, social, and environmental. Therefore, the overall objective of the SDG is about a harmonious, prosperous, progressive, and sustainable world. HPPS, just like it is a harmonious, prosperous, progressive, sustainable nation. That's where the common ground is. Now, the harmonious, prosperous, progressive, and sustainable aspiration are being the common ground, and this is where partnership can take place. And particularly in the 4 critical technologies that I mentioned earlier. Now, the Honorable Speaker has already mentioned how well we are doing in Malaysia in meeting the goals of SDG. But the way we have met the goal of SDG over the years is through the 5 Malaysia Development Plan. So I was told that we have started doing the goals of the SDG long before SDG came into play. And that is the way, because we have been looking at our own national priorities through the 5-year development plan. It meets the requirement, therefore, that you look at your own national priorities and then you will deliver the SDG's objectives. Now, I want to touch upon Global Goal 16, Peace and Justice. 16 calls for strong institutions, to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, to provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accessible, and inclusive institutions for all. These are actually ingredients for national harmony. The prerequisite and the most important factor for sustainability. Without harmony, forget about the rest of what sustainability is all about. And despite our claim for good progress toward achieving the target of SDG, I contend that the harmony factor is a cause for concern in Malaysia. Certainly, harmony cannot be taken for granted in our country at the moment. Why? These are the threats to integration, cohesion, and unity in our country at the moment. Racism, ethnic nationalism, divisive and polarizing rhetoric, religious intolerance, erosion of civility, empathy, and integrity, abandonment of the spirit of Muhibah and practices of neighborliness, abandonment of our acclaimed commitment to moderation and wasatiyah. Now, and this is what the Prime Minister said during the Chinese New Year message in February. Malaysians must not be taken in or influenced by groups threatening the country's peace and harmony. Let us all pledge to defend the stability, harmony, and peace in these beloved countries of ours. Now, let's just look quickly. Just quickly at the challenging road to harmony. Firstly, there is integration, the first milestone on our road to harmony. This is about coming together, working together, teamwork for specific purposes, sports, celebration. Now it is coming together over Musang King. These are harmony moments. They are not harmony, these are harmony moments. And these are social behavior, short-term objective. After you come together, you go back, you forget what are the reasons why we should be thinking about getting more cohesive. The second milestone to harmony. This is about a deeper understanding of the reason and principle for a long-term bonding, the basis for the birth of our nation, which was based on conceit, tolerance, and integrity. This is cooperation, collaboration, partnership. It's about security, stability, prosperity, and survivability. This is about harmony musra. This is a rational behavior governed by the brain. Now the next milestone is about full commitment, collective responsibility, loyalty, shared destiny, about civic nationalism and patriotism. This is about sustained harmony. This is an emotional behavior governed by the heart. And a combination of the social, the rational, and the emotional will give us the harmony musra environment and the way of life. Now, let us see how do we translate all that into institutional program? How do we translate national priorities into institutional programs? There are for organization doing things, actually going on to, able to influence, to go on the ground. There are two sets of factors. First of all, the organizational function 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever they may be. On the other side, there are the national aspiration of HPPS, harmonious, prosperous, progressive, and sustainable. If you put the two together, then you have a framework or metrics for implementation. If you take the university model, for example, I put on the organizational function of the university, it has to govern and administer itself, number one. It has to do teaching. It has to do research, development, and commercialization. It has to have industry outreach, community outreach. It has to also to be an advocacy and a source of advice to authority, to the government. It must have international collaboration, and of course there is extracurricular students' activities. These are the small purple on the left there are the function of the university. And then you put that against harmony, prosperity, progressive, and sustainability. You can feel each of those according to what you feel is important in terms of harmony. I've given some ideas earlier. You check across that to see what you can do or what you have done and how much you have done. And based on that, then you contribute. So if you do that, what happens is that the one you are doing on harmony, prosperity, progressive, and sustainability, you can check that against the 7 goals or 17 goals of the SDG. So you look at your own priority and you translate that into the objective of the SDG. Focusing on institutional efforts on national areas of concern within the context of national aspiration or national priorities, then matching them back to the various goals of the SDG is more beneficial for national perspective rather than trying to address directly each of the elements of the SDG. In any case, some of the goals may not be relevant in the national context. Now, for organization, there is advisory or there is advocacy. How do you implement? I propose that we take the ACCA plus E framework, raising awareness, facilitating comprehension, encouraging commitment, urging action, and mandating evaluation. That's the way that organization, which is advisory or advocacy, can do. Now, what can Parliament do? Pardon me if I seem to be teaching, being too clever to teach what Parliament can do. Since the function of Parliament is not only to pass federal laws, to make amendments to existing federal laws, to examine the government's policies and approve the government's expenditures and approve new taxes, but also to serve as a forum to discuss matters of public interest, the establishment of the all-party parliamentary group on the SDG, which the speaker has just mentioned, I think is very timely and laudable, sir. Now, what can Parliament and the AAPPG do in terms of implementing the SDG? I propose that we have, this is also for Parliament, for the APPG and the parliamentarians themselves. So you have the awareness, comprehension, commitment, action, and evaluation framework against the harmonious, prosperous, progressive, and sustainable. That Parliament can do, and that APPG can do, and that every parliamentarian can do. Parliamentarian can apply the same, the framework, emphasizing action translated into sustainable practices at organization, community, and individual level in their respective constituencies. Advise, create awareness, create understanding, create commitment, and create action. Action meaning sustainable practices. So global goal, national priorities, institutional program, and individual practices. So without that, as I said earlier, it will be just nice reports and beautiful rhetoric. Now, since we mentioned earlier the importance of STI in promoting or in achieving SDG, and STI in achieving socio-economic transformation for the country, I would like to suggest the following. Since SNT is critical component to the solution and delivery of the SDG as indicated by the 4 critical technologies described earlier, and since likewise the 4 critical technologies are crucial to the achievement of our national aspiration for a harmonious, prosperous, progressive, and sustainable Malaysia, debates on SNT issue impacting national socio-economic transformation should be an important function of Parliament. I would like to propose, therefore, that there be a parliamentary select committee on SNT incorporating the SDG to encourage vigorous public debate on these important topics, culminating in parliamentary debate that can influence progressive government action. A parliamentary select committee on SNT and SDG will complement and support the APPG on the SDG and contribute toward an optimal science and technology policy environment for our country, leading to impactful programs at national level that can also contribute to the global effort. Sir, the idea of a parliamentary select committee on SNT is not new. The scientific community in Malaysia has been urging for this for many, many years. Combining this with the urgency of the SDG, it is time to give the proposal serious consideration. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Tan Sri, for the interesting presentation. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now we will continue this forum with the first session of the day with the title Partnership between Civil Society Organizations and Parliamentarians for Sustainable Development. And the panelists for this session are Honorable Mrs. Maria Chin Abdullah, Member of Parliament for Petaling Jaya, Honorable Mr. William Leong, Member of Parliament for Selayang, Honorable Senator Mr. Yusmadi Yusof, Senator of the Dewan Negara and Chairman of Rights Foundation, Mr. Kon On Sin, Managing Director of Yayasan Kajian dan Pembangunan Masyarakat, and Ms. Lavanya Rama Iyer, Head of Policy and Climate Change of WWF Malaysia. And the moderator for this session is Dr. Lin Mui Kiang, Member of the National SDG Steering Committee and Member of CSO SDG Alliance. Without further ado, I hand over the floor to Dr. Lin. Please welcome.
Selamat pagi and a very good morning to Yang Dipertua, Datuk Speaker, Deputy Speakers, YB, Excellencies and distinguished guests. I would first like to start by thanking our most progressive speaker, Dr. Arif, who has set up this APPG for SDGs, which is a huge step towards enhancing the implementation of the SDGs. In this session, we will be discussing the partnership between parliamentarians and CSOs for sustainable development. It is clear that Parliament plays an integral role in realizing the 2030 agenda, as MPs represent the interests of citizens and can localize the implementation of SDGs at the subnational level. Parliamentary constituencies are in fact microcosms of the country. As for the SDG Alliance, it was formed shortly after the launch of the Agenda 2030 in 2015 and is made up of a wide range of CSOs. Being a member of the National SDG Steering Committee, which was formed under the National SDG Council, it has since been providing input into the National SDG Roadmap, the Voluntary National Report to UN, the 11 Malaysia Plan Midterm Review, and now into the 12 Malaysia Plan. It also collaborates with the UN. As the SDGs are comprehensive, covering from eradicating poverty to health, to consumption and production, urbanization, environment, governance, and access to justice, they require action by all stakeholders at all levels, such as by this APPG. In this section, we will be discussing the partnership between MPs and CSOs, which will focus on the economic, social, and environmental concerns pertaining to development planning and delivery, policy and strategic issues, strengthening the oversight function of the MPs, monitoring SDG implementation at constituency levels, and advising on local solutions. The panelists will suggest ways to promote dialogue between parliamentarians and civil society, leverage on their expertise and capabilities, and build partnership with government and the private sector to deliver results for ordinary people. Being newly born, this APPG has great potential and opportunity to contribute to the achievement of the SDGs by 2030. However, there is great urgency as we only have 11 years left. And there are still many, including those in government, who are not even aware of the SDGs. We would now like to hear from our panelists on how MPs and the CSO Alliance can synergize their strengths, expertise, and resources to best achieve the goals. As the distinguished panelists have been introduced, I would just like to invite each panelist to present his or her views in 7 minutes, after which we'll open the floor for a question and answer session. And we shall start now by inviting YB Maria Chin, MP of Petaling Jaya, who is also the first chairperson of this APPG, to present her views. YB.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera kepada Yang Berhormat Datuk Mohammad Arif, Speaker of the House, Yang Berhormat Datuk Rashid, Deputy Speaker, Yang Berhormat Tuan Nga Komeng, Deputy Speaker, Tan Sri Michael Yeo, Miss Marcella Suazo, Honorable Ambassadors, YBYBs, and also CSOs and friends, and also fellow panelists. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I will start with an introduction. With a sharing, actually focusing on how SDG goals can be relevant at the constituency levels and also in advocacy on laws and policies. When I, as a first-time parliamentarian, we have actually developed, together with the volunteers and also some of the people on the ground, a vision of how we see Petaling Jaya P105 working for the people. One is that we saw the SDG goals as targets. Yeah, it's a vast improvement from the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, and we have used it to measure some of the work that we do at the constituency level. And secondly is that it has to only work and able to work if there's partnership and participation from the people who are most affected. So in terms of our vision, we see it as more of empowering and championing the rights of the Rakyat to reset a nation for all so that nobody is left behind. The mission is really to strengthen between the Pakatan Harapan, the coalition that I represent, and also the CSOs. And initially, we only saw it as Pakatan Harapan and CSO, but we have actually brought in corporates into the constituency work at Petaling Jaya. The other one is that we had some outcomes that we hope to achieve come 5 years later. To actually have a much more systematic, institutionalized way of looking at things through evidence-based studies. The other one is to actually have an alliance built between the parliamentarian and parliament and also the CSOs. And what we also hope is to be able to have a platform to train activists to be more involved at the political arena. So these are some of the values and principles that me, together with 40 volunteers, actually have come up with. So it has disappeared. Those were the principles. But what we set off is that before we even try to implement SDGs or our principles and all that, our institutional structure needs to be clear and precise. So what we did was that while we have a team of a management team to support the work of P105, we felt that it has to be connected to the constituency. So the people on the ground were actually part and parcel of our program. And when we run a program, we do discuss with them, have meetings with a lot of the people on the ground. We also have this mobile office that goes around to disseminate information and to get feedback. And that kind of feedback was meant to actually feed into our advocacy and training programs at the parliament level, how we bring up the grievances or comments or even suggestions that come from the ground level. And the other one is really to liaise with the CSOs, because they have the information and they do have the experience to actually help the constituency to be better. So how we organize ourselves, we have actually, the SDG has got like 17 goals, yeah? But the focus area of P105 is only 7 work streams that we call it, yeah? And we are focusing on women, health, housing, youth, democracy, food, aid, and transport. And we try to look at how the SDGs can actually help us in these 7 areas. I just want to, since time is limited, the healthcare is something that we started with a survey of the Taman Medan Cahaya, which is one of the low-cost flats in Petaling Jaya. When we actually did our survey, we found that, you know, not only do we have stunted growth, but we also have issues of obesity and diabetics and heart problems, and some of them just do not know how to actually deal with some of these problems. So we actually set a target that we aim for 50 families, and hopefully 35% of these 50 families will actually be able to have a much more healthy lifestyle and to understand why the need to be healthy, because we see health being connected to the issue of poverty, to the issue of housing, and to medical care and so forth. So what we did in the program was to actually first teach them about hygiene. So in terms of medical checkup, in terms of providing them with seminars, healthy eating. We had supermarket sweeps to introduce them to different variety of food and vegetables that they can actually incorporate into their lifestyle, and also exercises. So what we got was eventually, we worked with University Malaya to actually bring in the doctors and the nurses and the volunteers to help us on a weekly basis for 6 months. We targeted these 50 families for over 6 months, and we hope that our success rate would be at about 35%. That was our target. We brought in corporate companies like Sime Darby to sponsor some of the programs. And we work very closely with the local clinic Kesehatan, the local health clinic. And what we did was that at the end of it, we got a success rate of 75% of the families. That means it's about 35 of the families actually participated and benefited from our program. We had now these 35 families who will be looking into another set of 50 families to bring them into this health program. And Sime Darby itself has actually committed to sponsoring the program for another year. So these are some of the ways in which we actually combine working with CSO, with the government agencies, with corporates, setting goals and targets, and most importantly is having that engagement, commitment, and also participation from people who are most affected by whether it's in the health category or transport or housing. Because without them and without any consultation with them, programs will not run and SDG goals will not also work. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, YB Maria Chin, for the tremendous amount of work you've been doing there in Tamon Cahaya. Now we'd like to invite the YB William Leong, MP for Selayang, to make his presentation. YB.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. Yang Berhormat Speaker, Muhammad Arif Yusof, Deputy Speaker, Tan Sri Michael Yeo, Excellencies, distinguished guests. A partnership between the civil society organizations and parliamentarians on the Sustainable Development Goals is logical, is natural, is complementary. The question that we should ask is, why didn't we do this earlier? And why we are not doing it more at this point of time? I think the answer is partly in what Dr. Lin has said. It's a question of awareness of the SDGs. At the moment, when we talk about SDGs, you are saying there are 17 SDGs, 169 targets, and then you look at the indicators, I think it's way above the head of many people, especially the people that you want to be the target of these SDGs. In fact, if you want to talk about SDGs to someone who doesn't know, you not only have to move back 15 years to the Millennium Development Goals, you got to move back to 1990 when you start to talk about human development and the understanding that the government, first obligation is to the people, not to the GDP or the GNP or the accumulation of wealth, that to understand that the real wealth of the country is the people. And it's the development of the people that is the first and foremost target that everyone should look at. And if we look at that and the people understand that they are entitled to live a flourishing life, a long, healthy life, dignity, decent work, leisure hours, the ability to participate in the community, in the political, social, and cultural activities, the very basic principles of being a human being. If we look at that, I think the question is, why haven't we done this earlier? And the problem comes with the same idea when Amartya Sen and the others have talked about the capabilities approach, that we are talking about functionings, we are talking about the expansion of choices, that there is a better life, which is something very strange to us Malaysians, because our forefathers have been telling us you have to work very hard, don't think about going for a holiday, work day and night. That is built into us, that we don't have an idea that we are entitled to some leisure time, that we are entitled to a life of dignity, and everyone has to work together, in particular the government, MPs, and the CSO. So it's a question of awareness. And not to lose focus of the forests and the trees, just as we understand that the GDP is not the indicator, now we have got 17 targets, 17 SDGs, 169 targets, and if you look at the indicators, I think no one will understand. So we look back at what is important. Look back at the question of no poverty, on health, on education, are we achieving it? And that brings me to the third point, where the MPs, together with the CSO and the government, we should be on the same page. Let us not look at those numbers and indicators. Let us look at what is happening on the ground. If you read the report on Malaysian Sustainable Development Voluntary Review 2017, absolutely beautiful numbers. We have reduced absolute poverty. Absolute poverty is 0.4%, 2014, with a population of 30 million. That's 120,000. I thought all of the absolute poverty people is in my constituency. Because there's definitely more than 120,000 if you take into account what happened to the calculation. So we always look at our numbers with a pinch of salt. As they say that there are three lies. Lies, damn lies, statistics. So we need to look at the statistics. Look at my area. As an urban portion, housing is difficult. A project was abandoned for 26 years. With a change of the state government, the state sank in 300 million to finish the housing. Finally, the people get to see the house. They could afford to see it, but they could not afford to buy it because the banks wouldn't lend them the money. So their dream house came, but they were not able to afford it. We look at livelihood. The entire government has changed the area from agriculture to development. Farmers who have been farming for the last 30 years have applied for land. They were given temporary occupation license. The government decides to give it to the developers. They are given compensation, 10,000, 30,000, but there's no place for them. They can't carry out the activities for farming. This is in Kundang, that's 12 miles outside of the city. It's happening today. They're still searching for land. We talk about education. We are very happy to report there's 95% of enrollment. I was an opposition member. We were not able to go into the schools. This year, I'm sitting on the right side of the government. We go in, and we are shocked, absolutely shocked. The roofs are skylines. The roofs are in disrepair. The walls and the windows are in disrepair. The toilets are in disrepair, and that's the teacher's toilet. We haven't even talked about the students' toilets. And when we ask, the ministry says that there is not enough money. They didn't have enough money to chop the trees, and one Sunday, luckily it was a Sunday, the trees fell, and that would have been the top class. So it is where our MPs, together with civil societies, can come in and monitor what is actually on the ground. I think that's where we start. Otherwise, statistics and reports, sugar-coated as they are, doesn't mean anything. So thank you.
Thank you, YB William Leong. And we really appreciate the commitment that you have been dedicating to your constituency. In fact, both YB William Leong and YB Maria Chin are the pioneers in this APPG for SDGs and the SC. And as CSO SDG Alliance have been making field trips to the constituencies to explore how we can work further to find local solutions. Thank you. We will next invite YB Senator Yusmadi Yusof, who is the chairman of the Dewan Negara, to present his views. YB.
I have to correct, I'm not a chairman of Dewan Negara. Then my boss will be upset. I'm a chairman of a Senate Reform Working Committee.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairperson. I only have 1 point to make for this topic. How parliamentarians and civil society supposed to have a kind of very productive relationship. The very big questions that I think at least bothering me when I was member of parliament, now I'm a senator, is this. What is the idea of democracy that we have here in Malaysia, at least for the last 60 years? Why I said so, at least I'm happy to note that Tan Sri Dato' Omar, who worked closely with the government, was advising the government. At least he said that what we've been practicing for previous years, in a way much earlier than before United Nations start talking about MDG, start talking about SDG. The reason I said so because the context that we are now, we are in a very special place in the world where I always say this in every forum I attended across the globe. The only place in the world where major civilizations are interacting, the Chinese, the Indian, the Muslims, the Europeans, and all this interaction for the last 60 years has created something. And that something can be the idea of modernity, can be the idea of developmental, can be the idea of political order, whatever you're going to call it. But the question is that what make this end up somewhere? When I say somewhere, because nobody can argue that whatever happened in this country for the last 60 years is something cannot be proud of. There are certain things can be proud of. The poverty eradication, I mean, she was at UNDP for years, you can share with them. There are certain attempts to improve our health somewhere. There are certain harmony, can be maintained. But the question is now, what's next? And 9 May, you guys, civil society, corporate sectors, politicians, students, youth, you come together, you want to do something. And it happened. So the question is this, as William said correctly, why is not happening before? For me, it may not happen before. Maybe we have a flawed idea of democracy. When I say democracy, I'm not trying to argue that democracy is the best political order, but at least is something work, something which can be say you can apply across the globe. But the challenge nowadays, I mean, ladies and gentlemen may know, democracy is not delivering the public goods. Democracy being challenged, democracy is not delivering the public goods. You can proud of Obama, but Obama produced, who's this? Who is the new guy? Donald Trump. But at the same time, you say someone tried to do something harmony in Middle East getting worse, and someone tried to do something. But suddenly I realized where we are now, the smallest region in the world, called Southeast Asia, not many, it's only about 600 million population, combined with 6 billion Asian populations. Somehow this remains the most stable region, Tan Sri, the most stable region, ASEAN. But the very question, why somehow it became the most stable? What is the developmental idea? How we do things here? Despite we have diverse, Tan Sri, we have diverse. This is the region where diverse in terms of ethnicity, religion, what else you want to say? And you have Vietnam with a commitment to communism, and you have now even Malaysia tried to talk to China because of the money is coming from there. If someone tried to talk about market communism, but the very question is that what Malaysia supposed to do? If I'm just here listening to say United Nations comes with SDG, let's apply, I don't think so it will work. And I'm here to hear that Millennium Development Goal, something beautiful, let's apply. It doesn't work that way. Because at least I can confidently say, from 2008 to 2013, I was in Parliament, just to tell the crowds here, we can count at least how many times the word human rights, how many times the word Millennium Development Goal, how many times the words now SDG, at least post-2015, been uttered, not yet discussed, been uttered and recorded in the handset. I may surprise you. Maybe you can ask Dr. Arif, get the RO research officer to research it. How many times the word, all these beautiful words been uttered? Apart from yesterday, the word what? Perompak. There's so many other beautiful words been mentioned in Parliament. That's number one. We must be very clear what's the idea of democracy that we're going to have. But I can offer one. At least I see it works in this region. I see it everywhere I go. I believe there is a wisdom in our forefather. Bulat air kerana pembentung, bulat kata kerana muafakat. Water can become rounded, some people call clays, and humankind can come together when they start to collaborate. But some people argue collaboration for what? It has to be collaboration for the higher purpose. The higher purpose is about what? You cannot be collaborating for corruption like what happened. You cannot be collaboration for some certain emotional. You have to be collaboration for the higher purpose. And that higher purpose has to be the last point of the SDG, which is for justice. Al-adlu bil ihsan. So at least if I can argue or suggest to this forum is that the very relationship that I would like to see between parliaments, civil society, governments, business sectors, Or maybe another important sectors, I call it sovereign individual. It can be ustaz, can be to imam, can be pastor. Because I realized when I was member of parliament, they are more effective than parliamentarian. You know, this imam, sometimes you try, you ask them to promote on HIV campaign. Sometimes they're more effective, people trust them more than parliamentarian. I think so. USM that time tried to create Balik Pulau Lestari. I don't know whether they make it or not. They got 2 million from APEC, whatever grant. And they're still struggling. Some people argue Lestari, some people argue Mampan. What is this? Even the word sustainability, we not even have a common understanding. Tan Sri was talking about common ground. We don't even have a common understanding what is Lestari, what is sustainability. So I think this forum, I think let come together, find our common ground, try to translate to the language that we understand. At least if we cannot find the centrality of how to do things, I think we may have, the big elephant in the room is parochialism. Parochialism is the siloness, civil society think this way, government think this way, and now we are talking about shared prosperity, Tan Sri. I don't know how we're going to translate that, kemakmuran bersama, you know, all these things. So I think let's define what is the ideal democracy that we would like to have, where that is about how the governments, the civil society, the business sectors, and the sovereign individuals can interact, can collaborate, and come together for the higher purpose, and that higher purpose has to be something which developed, that Malaysia is going to contribute to global development discourse, that I think we have a chance to do it because we make a right start, 9 May, without a single blood, in doing the smooth transition. Let's continue to do that. Whatever problem we may have, video, whatever recently, those are distraction. So I think let's be more focused. I think we can do it, inshallah. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, YB Yusmadi, for your profound thoughts. Our next two speakers will be from the CSO Alliance. And first one is Mr. Kon On Sen, Managing Director, Yayasan Kajian dan Pembangunan Masyarakat. Mr. Kon.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, Yang Berhormat, Mr. Speaker, Your Excellencies and members of this august house, ladies and gentlemen, Salam Sejahtera. I'd like to start off with saying that the state has huge funds and administrative support and general support services in development projects. However, state agencies are still finding it very difficult to resolve stubborn pockets of poverty, especially highlighted by the SDGs. And the question is why? May I suggest that one particular reason is the high barriers of misunderstanding. And these are in particular low levels of trust among the very hard pockets of poverty, the multi-dimensional complex causes of poverty in their midst, the ecosystems that are very weak, the different cultures, values, and mindsets. In order to bridge this gap and to bridge this last mile to reach out to these minority groups, there is a need for an empowerment partnership. Now, what does this empowerment partnership entail? It must entail a process of building understanding, trust, and journeying with the poor, mentoring and coaching them. Now, this is all very labor intensive and with very, very specific skills, soft skill sets that are needed. There is no mechanical solution to reach these deep pockets of poverty. There needs time, there needs presence, there needs soft skills, understanding, finding creative solutions. Let me give you an example of the work that we do with the Orang Asli. When we first helped them set up an organic farm, they had huge problems getting it up. Almost every week they wanted to give up. We had to teach them organic farming skills and move them from not just producing to commercial levels. They had to provide quality. You know, sometimes they see, wow, we eat all this, why can't we sell it? You know, it doesn't make sense to them. They need to be taught. They need to move into the big volumes and quality, regularity, and volumes that are required to meet the market demands. Then we had a next problem in terms of human resources. Some would spend 2-3 hours and say, okay, I've worked enough. And some would say, next day I need to take a break. Now, how do you keep that going? So they had to manage their own human resources. They needed skills to manage that type of situation. Then, On top of that, they had business skills, cash flow problems. You must understand, the Orang Aslis have never been socialized with doing accounts, spending money, keeping money, savings, tying it over. And these are all huge, huge barriers for them to overcome. But they cannot be simply have a workshop, train them, and then let them loose. Many times these projects fail. As a result, there has been not adequate time of presence, coaching, and an empowerment partnership relationship that is required. And so whilst the government has huge funds and general administrative support services and infrastructure, it does not have the manpower nor the soft skills in community development, social work to reach to these deep pockets of poverty. And this is where the CSOs can complement the state agencies in this area. CSOs are generally small, flexible, and can be very creative and innovative in that process. And they're not confined to set programs and activities or policies. One of the things we did when we came to the marketing, now we went to Selayang Wholesale Market, they were only paying 2 ringgit per kilo of vegetables. You can't survive, not for a farmer. I don't know how many farmers can survive on that. But for the Orang Asli, with the long distance logistics, it's impossible. They make nothing. So how do you overcome that? So being a CSO, we're able then to connect to the private sector, to open up fair markets. For example, we approached Jaya Grocer. They were very good. They adopted the farms as a CSR partner, and they provided them with the fair markets. Now they're making 3-4 times more than their original income as a result of that partnership. We had to apply to UNDP, GEF, Yayasan Hasana, gather in funds to start buying equipment, setting up irrigation systems, transport mechanisms, bring in the trainers, walk with them in this journey of capacity building, and now they are able to be self-sustaining. In contrast, at a government TSK program, it's a state-sponsored large plantation, generally monocrop program, and it provides 6 acres of all palm to provide one family with dividends of 500 a month. Now the problem with that is, as an economic activity, it may be good, but it lacks the ability of empowering. There is no skill transfer, and it promotes a mindset of a handout. All they need to do is just receive 500. But that 500 is neither here nor there. It doesn't move them out of the poverty line, and neither does it able to move them forward. So, in order to bridge this last mile and to reach these deeply marginalized groups, MPs, I believe, and this August House of Parliament can play a very important role of building a partnership, a platform where state agencies and CSOs can come together to bridge that gap. You know, one of the problems is state agencies sometimes have this distrust with CSOs. They're not used to working with CSOs. They're not used to the criticism of the poor and the voices from the grassroots. And they act very defensively at times. And sometimes the CSO is at fault because we don't maybe say it as nicely as we should. But however, there is this problem. How do we bridge this gap? And I think MPs in their constituencies can begin to gather CSOs, state agencies together, help them understand the problem and forge a way ahead. Not to fear empowering the poor, but to be bold and hear the voices of the poor and find innovative solutions in that process. And together with CSOs, I believe we can go much, much further if that's the case. And I would like to end with this quote. Young Muhammad William said, "Let's not lose the trees from the forest." For the Orang Asli, let's not lose the trees and the forest. We're here to protect the GDP. Or are we meant to protect the GDP? We are meant, I think, as civil society and as state agencies, to do what is good for the rakyat, to bring that shared prosperity, make that GDP be redistributed to where the deep pockets of marginalization are. And that, I think, is the goal of a society. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kon, for providing a very good perspective from the CSO side. And now we'd like to invite Ms. Lavanya Rama Aye, who is Head of Policy and Climate Change, WWF Malaysia.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and a very good morning to everybody. Thank you for having WWF here, and to the organizers for inviting us to be part of this historic forum in this very august premises. To dive straight into the topic at hand, I suppose what CSOs can bring, you have already heard very excellent interventions from the fellow panelists here as well as the speakers earlier about the value that CSOs bring. And a good question by YB William as to why this has not happened in the past. Well, perhaps CSOs were regarded as troublemakers, as rabble-rousers, bringing, as you said, criticisms that were uncomfortable to be heard and dealt with in the past. But I think all this has been evolving, and a really strong change point happened last year, and we should really now move with the times, and it's wonderful to see that we are having this forum and having CSOs being in the same partnership with the Parliament in trying to achieve this huge transformational agenda on SDGs, on the Agenda 2030. And I think it's already been touched upon. One of the things that we really have to look at is how we measure progress. What are we measuring? We have heard about GDP, when what GDP has not maybe achieved. What are we measuring? A very, very prominent person once said this: not everything we measure counts, and not everything that counts can be measured. That was Albert Einstein. So I think that's something that we really have to look at deeply when, and these points have already been made, that GDP alone cannot be something that we have to pursue ceaselessly and find still all the problems that we are hearing either collectively or in pockets that still exist, not just in Malaysia, but everywhere. Now, being from an environmental NGO, I'd like to bring the focus of my intervention to the interface between the environment and societal well-being. Malaysia can probably be regarded as quite a forerunner in terms of embracing sustainability and pursuing the developmental agenda, because even before it gained global traction, Malaysia had already in its third Malaysia's plan, spanning 1976 to 1980, already recognized the importance of development and the environment and dedicated a chapter to this. That chapter guided the policies to ensure sustained yield management and maintenance of ecosystem reserves, or what we would recognize today as sustainable production and conservation. And in the voluntary national review, Malaysia also included Goal 15, Life on Land, in preparing the report with the theme of that year, which was eradicating poverty and promoting prosperity in a changing world. Including the goal on life on land in this context was indeed encouraging, as it signaled an acknowledgement of the contribution of biodiversity and ecosystem services in the developmental gains reported in the VNR. The 11th Malaysia Plan contains a dedicated trust on green growth and continues to be pursued after the midterm review last year. Yet, after 40 years after the third Malaysia Plan and its emphasis on development and the environment, there are still states within Malaysia that have to resort persistently to exploitation of natural resources only, like timber, to generate basic income for the state. Hence, while the nation has recorded impressive annual GDP growth, some states continue to need improved amenities and infrastructure, and these states then over-rely on natural resources that they do have control over, from forests, for generating the income needed to run the state. While this may be a short-term fix, if resources like forests are not properly managed and harvested sustainably, their ability to provide other important services like flood mitigation, for example, would be diminished. Forests, after all, regulate water flow to rivers, and when there is overexploitation, soil erosion and sedimentation cause rivers to become shallow and flooding occurs downstream. Already, annual flood remediation costs sometimes run into billions of ringgit, as was the case after the severe flooding event in 2015. But not only that, more critically, they cause severe hardships to people whose homes and livelihoods and sometimes even their lives are swept away. This is a vicious cycle, as then the state would have to generate more income and turn to resources within its jurisdictions, namely the forests, and this in turn exacerbates the next flooding event. The federal government too steps in to alleviate the hardships of those affected and in turn diverts large sums of money that could be invested in general upliftment of the nation, be it through delivery of better education or health services. Hence, there is a snowball effect affecting the entire nation. And these are all actually elements of the SDGs. Furthermore, those who rely on forest resources, particularly the indigenous people, get further marginalized by being inequitably deprived of access to these resources. The forests are the supermarkets for a lot of our indigenous communities. So in the narrative of eradicating poverty and leaving no one behind, ending state poverty should be actively pursued. So in budgets, like we saw last year for the first time, there was an allocation of 60 million for protected areas. We hope that this is institutionalized. This becomes an annual allocation to enable protection by states of their natural spaces and rather than exploitation. Otherwise, we are going to find that we will be ensnared in a poverty trap, which in turn robs the nation of opportunities to further advance. I'm sorry, I'm just skipping through some of the points because I'm running out of time. One aspect that we also have to bear in mind is the issue of climate change. Now, ecosystems, biodiversity, climate change, these are all interlinked issues. We should really look after our ecosystems, and in order to enable us to create resilience, to avoid the extreme flooding events, to support food security, support water security, these are all elements that we need in the context of our achieving our SDG goals. So, in essence, I would like to emphasize that when we deal with SDGs, we have to look at it in our national context. We are a mega biodiverse rich nation. We really have to harness the wealth of that in addressing the issues that we face in terms of eradicating poverty, ensuring no one is left behind, ensuring that people have access to their rightful resources. And with that, I hope that the collaboration between CSO SDG Alliance and this group, the APPG, through the Parliament, will really enrich our abilities to deal with these immense problems that require transformational change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lavanya, for showing us the very close link between environment and social well-being. And we are now open to questions. And since we are running out of time, perhaps we can open up for 2 or 3 short and concise questions. Is anybody wanting to ask a question to the panelists?
I didn't even see it. A few brief ones. Firstly, there are too many goals. Goal number 17 is not a goal, it's a means of achieving goal. It's different. So you've got to delete that, please, right away, right? And some of those what we call SDGs can be combined together. A few of them can be put under environment, one chunk, yeah? And poverty and hunger, I mean, they come together, yeah? I mean, so things like that. So I did a brief count and I had only 8. I mean, I don't know, I mean, you might like to look at it, yeah? People, we talk a great deal about leaving no one behind. But as the years go by, more and more people are being left behind. Now, the problem really is that socio-economic structures do not support the idea of the SDGs. And some of these structures need to be revamped, yeah, before we can really see change. What
Your
else?
question, YB?
Pardon? The
Any
question,
specific
yes,
question?
Yes. I was coming to the question. The question is, who is spearheading the SDG, movement or whatever it is? Yeah.
Yeah. When the SDGs were launched in September 2015, the government fully endorsed it and set up the National SDG Council chaired by the Prime Minister. And under that is the National SDG Steering Committee chaired by EPU and now MEA. So they have been doing a lot of work with government agencies, CSOs, as well as the Statistics Department to try to monitor and keep track of all the implementation of all the SDGs in Malaysia. And so far, they have been preparing the roadmap, SDG roadmap. They have included it in the 11th Malaysia Plan midterm review, and more will be included in the 12th Malaysia Plan. So there is a concerted effort to include relevant SDGs into our Malaysia plans. Of course, it looks like there is such a long list of 169 targets, but when you look in detail, this is to ensure that all the goals are properly looked at in depth in order to try to solve these problems and not just generic motherhood statements. Any other question?
No, I think, can I, because what was raised by our gentleman here, for me, it attracted me, what you're talking about. If we're still promoting the same economic model, which is the current one is still about, rich become richer, it's still about consumption economics, if I understand you correctly, in no way we're going to have to reach this sustainable, more effective state for the poor. Because I think the current economic model, which is, I hope, it can be seen very much clearer in this coming budget. At least in Parliament, for me, the way I look at it, we're still trapped in the same consumption model of economics. To the extent it creates a very, I would say, a market access. To a certain extent, we thought that market going to help the poor. Actually, it's not. So I think at least I'm convinced the first book of Adam Smith, Theory of Moral Sentiment, is my Bible, not the second one, not the Wealth of Nation. But people very much focus on the Wealth of Nation. So I think that the very issue of ethics need to be instilled in our economic model, the way I look at it.
Yes, very much so. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Dennis McMahon here. I'm Australian, but I've been in Malaysia for 10 years. I run a business here called Green Business JV Marketing. We do farming systems with the ASLI, so we have an interest in how the whole process is going to work. My question is on the process, the APPG process. In particular, how exactly does the CSO levels come to meet with or discuss with the APPG? Does the APPG invite groups in, or do people request a meeting, or how is the process going to work?
Perhaps I can invite YB Maria to answer that.
The APPG on SDG, it would be on invitation. It's a little bit different from the Select Committee in the sense that it has the members of Parliament. It can also be open to the Senate, as well as CSOs. So we now have the APPG on SDG, so it's actually open to CSOs who are actually interested to engage in that topic. It can also be in many other issues, of course, but like what the speaker has said, we're starting with the SDG.
But does the CSO make a call to somebody and say, can I meet with the SDG?
Oh, I see. Yes, of course. It can be both ways. It should be both ways. And even with the select committees, it's also both ways, yeah? Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Lin, over here. Over here.
Mariama from NCWO. My concern is in regards to what has been raised by a couple of our speakers as well. It is in regards to the young people, where we are talking about 28% of the population. We also understand that the poverty, we are addressing poverty. Thank you very much, YB Maria. Thing is, when we look at especially PPR flats and so on and so forth, the houses are so small that it is really not conducive for our young children to live. And what I'm actually thinking is to actually enhance these children's capacity and skills and the power of expression, we actually need to create a space. And these spaces could be called a Harmony Mesra space, where a community hall can be built in all these areas. Make it a point that in every housing areas, each time something is built, a space has been created for children. It's a space not just for children, but for community together, where they're able to interact, where they're able to do away with whatever race, religion, background they may have, and activities to be created to suit those needs. The young population, again, it's a very crucial period. We need to empower them. We need to create that space for them to enable them to grow both intellectually and spiritually, so that they are able to contribute back to the society. So it is us who decide. If we do not give them the space, we can't blame them. There are a lot of issues, we know, but we as adults need to give them the space. Thank you.
YB Maria?
Actually, to be honest, PPR flats do have a day one. And that is part of the SOP for all the housing areas, including low-cost flats. But I think that the problem that we have in the PPR flats is that building a structure is not enough. You need the people to be committed to carry out programs, to organize all these programs for the people. Then only there will be response. At the present moment, if you look at Lembah, where I am, Lembah Subang 1 and 2, each 2 blocks, per 2 blocks, there is a day one. But there are not many programs being run other than using them for weddings and social gatherings. So I think that we need to relook at how we are going to organize low-cost flats and also PPR flats, so that there is more involvement, and it has to really reflect whether the people want, what are the kind of programs that the people want. We just can't impose programs on them either. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we are coming down to the time allocated to us, but I would like to invite the panelists.
One here. One question.
One more? Okay.
One more question. Yesterday, I believe there was a protest, there was a march, environmental group came to march, environment group to march to Parliament on July 18 on forest protection. Are you aware about it? Okay. So I'm going to quote what the president of the Pertubuhan Pelindung Khazanah Alam Malaysia, PEKA, okay, he's asking for the laws which has been 29 years old to be amended, because the Orang Asli has been suffering for that. There has been mistreated during blockage. As you can see in newspaper, how they were manhandled. Okay, so please look into it.
Yeah.
Orang Asli also here, right? Yeah. Some of them.
Ms. Lavanya, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it is a very important point that, when we look at amending our laws, as per the request from PERCA, that these aspects be taken fully into account. I mean, forests are very, very critical and important for the Orang Aslis, and yet we have not really taken into account or taken to full consideration their interests, perhaps when we design some of these laws, which is more, I think they've already heard, exploitative for economic growth and so on. So we really have to bring in that societal dimension into lawmaking, policy making, and everything. Thanks.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes left. I would like to give the panelists some last time for some last words.
If I can just answer the last question. On the proposed amendments to the environment and forestry laws, what we have now set up in Parliament is the Parliamentary Select Committee. One of them is the consideration of bills. And part of that function would be to allow members of the public and the civil societies to present issues for the Select Committee to look at and study and make recommendations. So I think this could be one of them.
Thank you, YB.
Just last point. Actually, the Orang Asli have been living in harmony with nature for a long time. They don't need any law. We just need to leave them alone. Okay. And we should not. Thank you. We should not dictate them according to our perception. We say they are marginalized. It is we who create the situation that margin.
Yeah, thank you. Any last words from the panelists? I think we have 1 minute left. I just want to let the panelists have a who?
Terima kasih. Saya Chu, anak lelaki Betiu daripada kampung Tazikini, Pekan Pahang. Soalan saya, macam mana ekonomi orang asli terjaga? Itu saja. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.
Saya tak ada jawapan yang tepat, tetapi saya nak maklumkan di Dewan Negara yang selama ini saya rasa kurang diberi perhatian, punya wakil senator daripada orang asli. Sekarang ni saya rasa Datuk Isa, kalau Datuk Isa yang mewakili orang asli. So saya dua orang siapa ni Bob Manolan, Wabi Manolan juga ada di sini, orang Pahang juga. So jadi saya nak cadangkan kepada rakan daripada bukan saja orang asli di Dewan Negara sekarang ni kita cuba melakukan reformasi Dewan Negara yang mana di bawah perlembagaan sepatutnya orang yang diwakili ialah kelompok berkepentingan terutama golongan minoriti, OKU juga ada, dan pada masa yang sama juga kita cuba menggalakkan sebab ayat digunakan dalam perlembagaan mereka yang berjaya di dalam profession masing-masing. Maksud sepatutnya Dewan Negara itu diwakili oleh tokoh-tokoh perniagaan, tokoh-tokoh profesional, yang mana saya rasa sebelum ini saya mengaku bahawa Dewan Negara itu kurang diberi perhatian. Malah dari dalam perlembagaan juga sepatutnya mewakili suara-suara daripada wilayah, suara-suara negeri. Jadi saya rasa hari ini kita tahu selepas 9 Mei dari Perlis sampai ke Sabah, suara-suara ini sudah mula mendapat perhatian. Jadi saya fikir pandangan yang rakan orang asli tadi beri tadi itu, saya rasa perlu rakan saya Bob Manolan, ada senator wakil orang asli di sini, dan juga ini saya dengan insyaAllah saya cuba panjangkan. Dan sesi kita 22 hari bulan ni, kalau boleh jemput datang. Seminggu. Okay, terima kasih.
Thank you very much. I would like to give a round of applause to the panelists and to yourselves for being such a wonderful audience. Good afternoon.
Thank you to the moderator and all the panelists for the fruitful session. Now, we will continue our agenda for today with the second session of the forum entitled Role of Business and Academia in Achieving the SDGs. And the panelists for the second sessions are Professor Tan Sri Datuk Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector of International Islamic University Malaysia, Ms. Ana Marika Dehan, Managing Director of Unilever Malaysia and Singapore, Ms. Mastura Adnan, Head of Brand, Sponsorship and Sustainability of Standard Chartered Bank Malaysia Berhad, Professor Datuk Dr. Muhammad Shatar Sabran, Vice Chancellor of Universiti Pendidikan Sultan Idris, and Mr. Roberto Benitello, Chief Executive Officer, EU Malaysia's Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And this second session will be moderated by Tan Sri Michael Yeo. Please welcome.
Yang berhormat Tuan Yang di-Pertua, Deputy Speakers, Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. This session will focus on the role of academia and business in achieving the SDGs. The session will look at how there can be greater collaboration between the universities and between the private sector in working with government and CSOs to move forward the SDG agenda. So in this regard, I think the panelists will be focusing on SDG 4, which is on quality education, on SDG 12, response to consumption, responsible consumption and production, SDG 11, focusing on sustainable cities and communities, on SDG 5, focusing on gender equality, and perhaps we can also look at SDG 13, which is protection of the environment. So with these very few words of introduction, I would like to invite our distinguished panelists to share their thoughts with us. A gentle reminder that today being Friday and Friday Press is around the corner, we like to seek our cooperation of our panelists to try to keep your remarks to between 7 to 8 minutes each so that we have a little bit of time for interactive discussion later on. May I firstly invite Yang Berbahagia Professor Tan Sri Zulkifli Abdul Razak, currently Rector of IIUM, former Vice Chancellor of USM, and my fellow colleague before on the board of MACC. Tan Sri.
Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. Let me thank you, first of all, to have me here to share my thoughts on SDG, which probably is slightly different from what I've heard today in this hall. Let me try and clarify. When we look at SDG, we go to the definition of development that is needed for today without compromising the development of tomorrow or the future as it is. Now, when we look at this definition, we will ask, what about the past? We talk about the present, we talk about the future, well, what about the past? And these are the questions that was raised by the previous panels. When we begin to understand SDG in a context which is quite different from what the past has been all about. If you look at Asia, we look at Bali, for example, the Subak system has been there 1,000 years. And the Subak system has been sustained for a long time before even the concept of SDG emerged 30 years ago. You go to Bhutan, the concept of sustainability was there since 1929. That was brought in, and the king then translated this into the concept of happiness. Now you know the gross national happiness is part of SDG. You go to Thailand, the previous king, 17 years ago, introduced, 70 years ago, introduced the concept of sufficiency economy. You go to Malaysia, when we look, the word sejahtera has been there from Sanskrit many, many years ago before even SDG has been crafted. So when you talk about SDG, it is to me a stunted sort of a concept within our own context, within our own value, within our own civilization. And therefore the past has not been attended to because we only understand SDG in the context of Eurocentric or Western-centric ideas. And therefore it doesn't work for us. When we talk about SDG, we translate it into pembangunan lestari. You go down to the kampung and ask makcik, bagaimana pembangunan lestari, makcik? And she blink at you twice and she say, makcik tak pakai Listerine. Because we have taken it out of context. And suddenly you ask her, what about sejahtera, makcik? Oh, makcik memang sejahtera. You know, so we have got it wrong. Not only it is not uttered in the parliament, When it's uttered in a context that we don't even understand it. We work with the Orang Asli in our university, Kampung Orang Asli, which is very close, and we learn a lot more from them than they learn from us because they have been sustainable for a long time. The jungle is their library. The jungle is where they learn about things, and they have been interacting with the jungle. They've got even gadgets called kerchang that they learn and teach their young how to be sustainable, and there are 10 kerchangs that they need to go through. They give me one kerchang, a professor as I am, I could not solve the problem because I don't have the thinking that these people have got. So we are diluting ourselves when we talk about SDG, the way we understand it, and therefore we need to come back to the past and understand the past so that at least Malaysia understands SDG in its own context, its own value, its own civilization, and its own worldview. Until we get that straight, I think we're just diluting ourselves, saying that, oh, we meet this target, we meet that target, we meet that target, but that target is actually meaningless. We are not focusing on the people, as Y.B. Williams say. We are focusing on the target, and the target is not people. And I think this needs to be put right. And therefore, when we talk about education, where has education gone wrong? Education, to me, has gone wrong because our education system is developed on an unsustainable sort of way. What do I mean by that? This education system comes out from the Industrial Revolution 300 years ago that started the whole thing to be unsustainable. There was no need to discuss about sustainability before the Industrial Revolution because it has been sustainable. It was the past. When Industrial Revolution comes in, when consumption goes up, when capitalism was introduced, when the word boss was introduced in the Second Revolution, then everything got topsy-turvy. Because they want mass production, because they want labor, then they create what they call schools, education system that is very much mirroring the factory. The university now is just another factory. At the end of the day, we produce human capital. We don't even produce human beings. And therefore, we do not have the completeness of what sustainability requests of us as making the target of humanity and the people around us. So these are issues that I think which is very, very fundamental that the Parliament wants to take on and ask, what is the education system doing at the moment in time? We've got the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan that talks about sustainability ingrained in it 30 years ago when it was created. The word is sejahtera. Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan say, in a nutshell, at the end of the day, everybody that goes through the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, through the education system, must have what they call kesejahteraan diri. In other words, you feel the sejahtera in you, and then you can dispense sejahtera to other people. But what is sejahtera? Everybody talk about salam sejahtera. Sejahtera Malaysia, Kedah sejahtera. You know, and in Kelantan you also have Tandas sejahtera. But what is sejahtera? Anybody can operationalize sejahtera before we can make sense that diri kita sejahtera. We do not. Why? Because we have neglected the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan for 30 years. And mind you, when the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan was created in 1988, the Sustainable Development Goal even emerged then in 1987. And the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan talked exactly what Tan Sri Omar was talking about. Insan seimbang dan harmonis. It's already there. Seimbangnya atas apa? Intelek, jasmani, rohani, emosi. Dasarnya kepada apa? Kepercayaan dan kepatuhan kepada Tuhan. Baru kita dapat kesejahteraan diri. But where is this concept in the education system today? We talk about everything else but the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan. Now we are going to the 12th Malaysia Plan. I really hope the Parliament will badger the Ministry of Education and see where is the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan in the 12th Malaysia Plan. If there is none, we are going to go into the same cycle again. When we finish the 12th Malaysia Plan, we will not be going out of the rot. In fact, we are going to rot further. Because why? Because we are now talking about the fourth industrial revolution. What is the fourth industrial revolution? It is not about automation. It is not just about efficiency in economy. It's about challenging the humankind itself. The discussion has not been completed. There's a discussion that talks about when the AI moves on an exponential rate, the human intelligence moves at a linear rate, you will meet a point called singularity. At the point of singularity, we will produce another species called the transhuman. Who knows about the transhuman? Can the parliament prepare the future when you do not know what the transhuman is all about? But when you see the discourse about transhuman in the internet, they say the transhuman is even more powerful than God. That's the kind of discussion that I hope the parliament gets involved in, a highly intellectual, so that then we can craft a policy that actually determines our future in the character that we wanted. And therefore, the university must change. Whether you like it or not, the university must change. The university is not a bureaucratic setup. The university must be, and I want to put this on record, like a CSO. The university must function like a civil society that is mission-oriented, people-oriented, resourceful, autonomous, community-based, and collaborative. No more this hierarchy that we talk about. No more these layers that we talk about. No more pushing down from the ministry right to the university, that the university suddenly becomes another government department that do not have the intellectual capacity to bring the nation up to where it should be. On that note, let me just say thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Tan Sri Dr. Zulkifli. May I now invite our next speaker, Ms. Enrica Dihan, who is the Managing Director of Unilever in Malaysia and Singapore.
Thank you. Good morning, Yang Berhormat Mr. Speaker, honorable members of the Parliament, Excellencies, distinguished guests. Salam sejahtera. Pertama sekali, saya ingin mengucapkan ucapan terima kasih kepada pihak penganjur kerana sudi menjemput Unilever Malaysia untuk bersama-sama berkongsi usaha-usaha kami dalam menyokong Sustainable Development Goals Forum ini. It's my privilege. Thank you. Terima kasih. It's my privilege to share with you today about Unilever's efforts towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. They are a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create a better world. Unilever contributed to the SDGs, to the development of them in 2012 when our former CEO, Paul Polman, served the UN panel. Unilever is a leading consumer goods company serving 2.5 billion consumers every day with over 400 brands in 119 countries. Our sustainability vision began over 120 years ago in 1885 when our founder, William Lever, started selling Sunlight soap to make cleanliness commonplace at a time when cholera was at its peak in Great Britain. This simple purpose for Unilever has evolved into making sustainable living commonplace, which we bring to life through our three-pillar business strategy. Brands with purpose grow, companies with purpose last, and people with purpose thrive. In Malaysia, where we have a legacy of over 72 years, we are committed to aligning our business strategy with the SDGs. We believe that brands with purpose grow. For example, our brand Lifebuoy, in partnership with the Ministry of Health, educates over 400,000 children on hand washing across 250 kindergartens, targeting areas where hand-foot-mouth disease is still endemic in Malaysia. This is helping to contribute to SDG 3 on good health. Through our Fair and Lovely Foundation, every year we provide scholarships to young girls to pursue their aspirations. This is aligned to SDG 4 on quality education and SDG 5 on gender equality. On gender equality, we also conduct workshops in schools to educate young girls on self-esteem and body confidence through our Dove Self-Esteem program. Our mobile ice cream vendors, called Iron Walls, helps to provide job opportunities to micro-entrepreneurs, including ex-army veterans. This contributes to several SDGs, such as reducing poverty, decent work and economic growth, and reduced inequalities. At a company level, we continue to champion various SDGs in partnership with other organizations and social organizations using our skill for good. For example, we work together for Zero Hunger with Lazada and Malaysia's leading food bank, the Lost Food Project, to feed 100,000 Malaysians in need. We also advocate for legal working rights of refugees in Malaysia in partnership with UNHCR and the Tent Foundation. We believe this will help reduce poverty, provide decent work opportunities, and reduce inequalities. Malaysia is home to over 170,000 refugees, making this the biggest refugee population in Southeast Asia. I urge everyone today to seize this unique opportunity to lead the progression of human rights in ASEAN. On the environmental front, we are committed to reducing plastics. We want to transform 100% of our portfolio using post-consumer recycled plastics. Our home care brands, Breeze and Sunlight, are more than halfway there. We have also pioneered a plastic collection recovery initiative, an industry alliance that aims to tackle recycling and packaging waste. To change consumer behavior, we partner with Tesco to promote the uses of reusable shopping bags. Through these efforts, not only are we supporting SDG 12 on responsible consumption, but also 11 to create sustainable cities and communities, and helping keep plastics out of the world's oceans, which impacts SDG 14 on life below water. While we have taken these steps, we believe that it's not enough, and we cannot do this alone. To successfully drive a circular economy, we need others to join hands with us. There are many elements which are outside our direct control, such as lack of segregated waste collection in Malaysia, limited recycling industry. In fact, only 14% of plastics used globally make its way to recycling plants, and 9% is actually recycled. That is too low. We hope to work with the government to drive systems change. We need to build a clear action plan to develop our waste infrastructure, and equally to work together to educate consumers on waste segregation, so we can ensure plastics get the best chance at being recycled. Finally, as the world's largest single buyer of palm oil, purchasing 3% of global production each year, Unilever leads the adoption of sustainable palm oil. We use our skill to educate palm oil suppliers and farmers to adopt sustainable palm oil practices. We require all our suppliers to comply with our sustainable palm oil sourcing policy, which includes no deforestation, no development on peat, no exploitation of people or communities, drive positive impact for smallholders and women with greater transparency. Our work in the palm oil industry is supporting SDG 12 responsible consumption, SDG 13 on climate action, and SDG 15 to protect life on land. We want to use our purchasing power to transform the palm oil industry. For example, we collaborate with NGOs Forever Sabah and WWF Malaysia to sustainably certify 60,000 hectares of plantation, which will benefit 200 to 300 palm oil farmers in Malaysia. Our skill enables us to have an impact, but even so, we cannot achieve the level of change needed on our own. It is clear we must double our efforts with urgency, work together to transform the value chain, and put an end to commodity-driven deforestation. We believe that people with purpose thrive. All our work to support the SDGs in Malaysia would not be possible without our employees, driven by a common purpose to grow our business in Malaysia's sustainability. They help us to be Malaysia's #1 employer of choice 5 years in a row. At the same time, we value diversity, whether it's gender, we are fully gender balanced in Unilever, generation, we have 67% millennials, ethnicity, abilities, education, or skills. Partnerships. At the foundation of all these initiatives is SDG 17, the role of partnerships, because it's only through partnerships with the government, our customers, our suppliers, NGO partners, and industry that we can make a bigger impact together. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our journey on SDGs. I hope we can continue to find new ways to advance the goals together. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, for your presentation and sharing the best practices of Unilever in Malaysia. May I now invite our next speaker, Ms. Mastura Adnan from Standard Chartered Bank, Malaysia.
Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera yang berhormat, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to take 1 minute to introduce who we are and what we do. Standard Chartered Bank, I think most of us know, but may I share with you, and do you know that we are the first and oldest bank in Malaysia? We were the first bank in Malaysia, Penang, The first branch was in Penang 144 years ago. And I think we stick around, right? I mean, through ups and downs, markets booms and crash, the good times, bad times in Malaysia. If it is not called sustainable, I don't know what that is for Standard Chartered Bank. So yes, we are a financial institution. We offer banking services to create economic and social development, and for the, hold on. So you would think that a bank makes profit all the time. But of course, did you think that being here, creating and giving, lending loans and giving loans to people and company for them to succeed and creating wealth and growth in their business, I think that is very much into contributing to the sustainable economic and social development of the market that we are in. So another background is we are an international bank with 86,000 employees globally, presence in 60 countries. And in Malaysia, we employ 8,000 employees, and that's creating jobs for Malaysians. And we have 32 branches, and we very much help local business to go cross-border. So those are the things that I think the niche that we have for Standard Chartered Bank Malaysia. So let's go to the Sustainable Development Goals and how were we involved. In 2015, I think Ms. Marcela could testify to this. Standard Chartered is one of the financial institutions pioneering in supporting the campaign in Project Everyone, Marcela, and to raise awareness in SDGs. So for Standard Chartered Bank Malaysia, we try very much to raise the awareness through the media, and I think the traction was really good. And in February 2017, the bank launched Sustainability Aspirations. And these aspirations are built on our 3 sustainability pillars with measurable targets. So this is very important. I think anybody could commit and promote and say that they do this and that, but at the end of the day, it is all about measurable targets and publishing it. So when you publish your sustainability aspirations with all the targets and what you have achieved, these are audited and, of course, show how serious we are in trying to achieve those goals. So why does SDG matters to us? As a bank, as I said, it will support our development agenda and draw upon our deep networks. Remember, with presence in 60 markets, and with financial expertise to support the aspirations of SDGs, we promote sustainable economic development across the market. And we are committed. We are a bank, right? We are closely aligned to economic, business and banking development to promote social and economic stature of each country that we are in. So if I spoke about how we have job creations and how we help people and companies to grow. So that alone have already addressed a lot of the 17 sustainable the SDG goals that is listed here in this book that is very cleverly put together by the UN. In the no poverty space, we provided to microfinance institutions. I think YB Williams spoke about how sometimes bank can be really sticky in lending to people, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of risk assessments and things like that that we have to keep into account. But we try very much, and microfinancing is huge in every market that we do. That's growing small businesses to what some companies can be where they are now. So in No Hunger and Good Health, we put them together, and this is part of our community investment programs, and we have an established track record in promoting health. Like, for example, we are one of the only big organizations that promote seeing is believing. So seeing is believing is all about prevention of blindness. So a lot of markets that we operate in, especially in Africa, Middle East, and Asia, a lot of rural areas folks, when they develop cataracts, for example, they always thought that they are already going blind. So we create this awareness and education and tell them, hey, this is not blindness, you can be treated. And that's when we, in Malaysia alone, we have provided over 8,000 intraocular lens cataract lenses for underprivileged people. And we're happy to report, out of the 7,000, I think about 5% of them has gone back to working. They go back to driving their taxis, they go back to help out in the markets, as in pasar, and they do that. So that really already giving back to the economy. And I think that's some amazing achievement that we've done locally. In education in Malaysia, we work with Ministry of Education, and we have GOAL, G-O-A-L. It doesn't mean anything, it's just GOAL. It's a girl empowerment program where we teach these girls of how to be money savvy, how to be healthy, how to be empowered, and how to be yourself. You'll be surprised that you would think our girls they know everything, but some of them actually, in our mentoring session, they think after SPM, I must get married because there will be less one mouth for my parents to feed. And that's very disheartening for us to hear. But after going through 20 weeks of mentoring with us, she has decided that, hey, after SPM, even though I don't get accepted to colleges, I can still work and maybe pursue my ambition and even join Academy Fantasia. At least there is an ambition there. So we believe that you can change one girl at a time. So as long as the impact is there, I think we believe the bank is doing everything we can, not just economically, but socially. And before I end, I really like Henry Ford's quote that says that a business that makes nothing but just money is just a poor business. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mastura. May I now ask the Vice Chancellor of University Pendidikan Sultan Idris, Professor Dato' Muhammad Shatta, to address us.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning. Yang berhormat, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Yang berhormat Dato' Muhammad Arif, Yang di-Pertua Speaker, Timbalan Speaker, YB, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, on behalf of UPSI, I would like to say thank you very much for the organizer for giving us a chance to share our views in terms of SDG. And of course, we have heard this morning, we have talked about a lot of SDG, but for my purpose, I'm going to zoom to item number 4, or goals number 4, which is quality education. And of course, this one is related to our function as a university. And just to let you know, we are going to be 100 years for a couple years. If you are talking about higher learning institution, of course, as a university, we are just turned out to be 22 years old. Okay, again, when we are talking about next slide, where is the thing? Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, can I have these things? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to focus on quality education. Again, when we are talking about quality education, people will ask me, what does it mean? And of course, to be honest, we do not have the exact answer. What does it mean when we are talking about quality education? Because it's varied. Of course, we have been getting our independence for the last 60 plus years. And of course, when we are talking about quality education in 1957, the definition was different from what we are talking today. Back in 1957, 67, when I was born, when we are talking about good quality education, meaning that you have a good academic qualification. So when you get a good score in SPM, SRP back then, now PMR, now PT3, a good CGPA, then people will say you are so damn good quality kid. But now it's 2019. And a lot of people nowadays, when you are depending solely, purely based on your academic qualification, is no longer relevant, especially when you are looking for a job. So therefore, when we try to define what does it mean by quality education, we need to take a lot of criteria into consideration. And of course, a country also needs to be considered. Place, time, and so on. Of course, if you go to the United States and you ask them what does it mean by quality education, they might come up with different definition. You go to India, you go to Sri Lanka, you go to Bangladesh, they come up with different definition. There is no such thing as one size fits all. But we are talking about Malaysia. So we cannot bring a particular formula that seems very well in those countries and bring over here, and therefore we say definitely it's going to work well in this country. So for this purpose, I'm going to share with you what is the role of UPSI in terms of bringing good quality education among our students, among our graduates. So in this case, in terms of helping the country, in terms of helping the agenda of SDG, I divide into two parts, the input part and the output part. Now, of course, the input we try to bring as many as possible, giving a chance to many people. So in this country, a special needs student, we have like B40, M40, and lately I think the Minister of Education were talking about zero reject policy, meaning to say every single person under the umbrella of Malaysian, you are entitled to pursue your study at any level. So meaning, I cannot reject you because you are a special kid. I cannot reject you because you're coming from certain group of people. You are eligible to apply, and that's what zero reject policy is. But again, when they are joining the university, especially UPSI, we call it now university number 1 in education. What can we do as a university to help them so that they can become a better person? Professor Tan Sri Zul was talking about falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, and the basic word is Jerry, that everything must be balanced, physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual. What can we do as a university? So therefore, at UPSI, we talk about beyond academia. When we say beyond academia, it does not mean we do not pay attention to the significance of academic. We still want our students to have a good grade, CGPA-wise, at least 3.0 and above. To be great is 4.0. But again, as I said, if we are only producing 4.0, it does not going to mean anything at this point, because the people outside there, they're not just use your academic qualification. And therefore, we introduce the concept of 2 A's, meaning academic, excellent in academic, and also excellent in attitude. You see how our kids behave now? Check their Facebook, what they are talking about. Not the kid also, and our Facebook also. You know, there's dispute, false news in second. Wrong problem, something wrong with the attitude. How are we going to produce a better quality in the future if our young generation, who's supposed to be the future leaders, having that type of attitude? And that is our role as university. And again, we also want our kid, our graduate, to have more than 3 languages, because now by knowing how to speak Malay is so yesterday, sorry to say. Knowing how to speak English is so yesterday. They need to speak more than those 2. Mandarin, Japanese, Spanish, doesn't matter, but they need to learn. But they cannot expect all this must be done by the university. They have to. The role of the university, inform them. The role of the university, to facilitate them. And of course, beside all those, we at UPSI also introduce what we call it certified skill. Beside having a bachelor in physics, biology, they have all those, they can speak more than 3 languages. They have a certified skill, meaning skill that they can use and being endorsed by the government. These are examples. So we engage with industry. Yesterday we have signed our agreement with UFL. So they will train our kid. They will expose our, when I say kid, it's my student. Okay, it's not my kid. I always call my students a kid. It's being a father, right? So our student to become event manager, handling event at the national level or international level, become entrepreneurship, development, and also become trainer. They will be trained by UFL, one of the biggest sport industry. I mean, everybody knows. And at the same time, we engage with Zakim to help our students to have a certificate so that they can slaughter thing, cows, whatever, chicken. So if they have a wedding, they don't have to call imam to slaughter the chicken because they can do it because they have been certified by JAKIM. And also to pengurusan jenazah, handling the dead body. Now if somebody pass away, you got to wait for imam to do it. Do not have to have problem in the future. All the UPSI kid can do it. It's endorsed by Jabatan Agama Islam Perak. Again, and also coaching, we engage with Gold Coast. So these are the things that we are doing so that students have a certain quality beyond academia at this point and onwards. When we are talking about good quality education, good quality people, they're not only having a good quality academically, but at the same time, they have all those values and all those criteria. If we can have all this, I'm sure Malaysia definitely become the most successful country in the future. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih, Professor Dr. Muhammad Shatta. Our last speaker for this session is Mr. Roberto Benitilo, the CEO of the EU Malaysia Chamber of Commerce.
Honorable Speaker of the House, Deputy Speaker, Tan Sri, thank you for inviting me here today and for the opportunity to speak about business sustainability, which is a topic that is very dear to me. I'm going to share my views on business sustainability. Sustainability has come a long way. A company develops sustainability strategies, they market sustainable products and services, and they create positions such as Chief Sustainability Officer. They publish a sustainability report with which, with transparency, they want to communicate with investors, activists, consumers, public at large. Up to now, sustainability has been about integrating pre-existing business considerations. So it's been integrating sustainability and the concepts of sustainability into the status quo, business as we've known it so far, reacting to market shifts or mostly regulatory constraints. Moving forward, sustainability will involve a disruptive revision to the systems of which businesses are part, as well as a radical rethinking of some pillars, some notions that are, for example, the corporate purpose or the concept of production and sustainable consumptions. Business models will be completely reviewed, and most importantly, metrics, the way we measure performance of business and the way we measure business success. The model of economic development based on exploitation of virgin raw material and energy was fundamental to the development of the world economies as we know them. And it has led to unprecedented growth over the last decades. However, this linear approach to production and consumption has, as you know, reached its physical limit. In a circular economy, the value of products, materials, and resources are retained in the economy as long as possible, and waste generation is minimized. The move towards circular economy models is becoming a reality despite of many barriers currently present. And we in Europe, but in other parts of the world, we have great examples of circular economy, new business models. Moving forward, there will be a transition and we will see sustainability moving from a cost or compliance problem to a way of achieving value. So it will be an instrument, a tool for value creation for companies. And this is and will be a game changer. Many drivers, the main drivers for this next phase of sustainability are companies are going to look into sustainability to manage costs and to create cost reductions, energy savings, cost reduction in flow of materials, cleaner production. They're going to look into sustainability to manage risk and risk reduction. Think about climate change and climate change-related risks. Companies are going to look at sustainability to increase their sales and profit margin because they're going to cater to new segments of the market. They're asking for more sustainable products. Companies are going to look into sustainability to handle, manage, improve, enhance their reputation and their brand value. Starbucks works with NGOs, and Unilever, for example, collaborates with WWF, and examples are many more. Sustainability is going to be essential for companies to attract employees. In order to become an attractive employer, you need to be sustainable, and this is going to be more and more important as we go along. And finally, sustainability is going to push companies to be more innovative. So the link between sustainability and business innovation will become more and more apparent as we go along. But if we look at the orientation of company towards sustainability, that varies dramatically. Company behaves in a very different way when it comes to sustainability. Some companies are, just to cite some scholars, reactionary. So they look at sustainability as a way to comply to regulations. And for them, sustainability is only a cost. It's a pain, okay? These are the least virtuous sustainable businesses. Then there is a reputational company. These companies look at sustainability as a way of looking good. And they try to, post on social media all the time and boast what they do in terms of, for example, CSR programs. But sustainability for these companies is not ingrained in their DNA. And then there are the more virtuous companies, the responsible ones, that look at sustainability in order to create efficiency gains, cost reductions, and other important changes in the company. And finally, there are the collaborative companies striving for contribution, real contribution to sustainable development goals. These companies are those that, for example, talk to a larger audience of stakeholders, even the most vulnerable ones. So what drives companies to become more sustainable? And when they start the journey, do they go through a path of progression in their sustainability orientation? These are not easy questions, but they're very interesting because the answers would start giving indication of a timeline. How long will it take for companies to contribute positively to sustainable development goals? So the adoption of sustainability and the timing of that adoption is a very critical and important piece of information for us to understand. Personally, I'm so puzzled by this question that I've decided to go back to school. My PhD research project is trying to shed some light on exactly these issues. We at UMCCI, the U Malaysia Chamber of Commerce and Industry, are very serious about sustainable development. And we have embarked in a number of projects. One of them that I want to mention today is called Europa Awards for Sustainability. It's a program that aims to identify, qualify, promote business excellence in Malaysia from companies that have demonstrated extraordinary performance in the field of sustainability. We have done actually two editions, 2017 and 2018. This year is the third edition. I want to mention this because we have, through Europa Awards for Sustainability, we have scanned so far over 200 companies, and we have looked into what they have done in terms of sustainability activities, and sustainability programs, okay? And some of the lessons that we have learned are quite interesting. For example, if we look at last year participants, 40% were large companies, 55 SMEs, and 5% NGOs. What strikes me and what is amazing is to see the quality, the relevance, and the range of sustainability practices of some of the projects that have been successfully implemented. So some of the projects are really extremely good, and they are a good example of what should be done. However, companies have still limited knowledge on the potential and scope of sustainability beyond sustainability as compliance. They have limited knowledge of what sustainability can do for them. There is a tremendous need to educate the business community in sustainability. And knowledge sharing of practical cases is a very important part of this education process. We at UMCCI are committed to continue in this mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roberto, for sharing your insights and your views. We have about 10 minutes for some questions, interaction, before we break for lunch. May I invite the first comment or first question from the floor, please? Yes,
Mr. Chairman. Sorry.
No, there's somebody I recognize just before you. We'll come back to you. There's a person there. Here. Can you tell us who you are, please? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Daffy. I'm from Paddy Connections, and I have a question for the education segment. So, business is done in such a way that I think nationally and globally we're at a point where there's the question of what are we trading off in order to make profit. So, coming to the question for education, or at least a couple of the speakers who have come from that segment, what has been some of the biggest difficulties or challenges that they have faced with respect to sustainability of the business in education, in creating the kind of results that they need to create, at the same time satisfying sustainability goals?
I would suggest perhaps we take a couple of questions and then we'll let all the panelists to respond together with your indulgence, if that's okay. Yes, you wanted to, and then.
If I may just touch upon one of the points brought up by the academics, and that is that the sad fact that our universities are not producing even good human beings. You see, Mr. Chairman, friends, we are not the body that we see. We are a bundle of the body, the mind that we don't see at all, and the spirit that we see even less of. So unless we cultivate the three, the world's not going to change one bit. Thank you.
Okay, the gentleman over there, Mustafa.
Assalamualaikum and afternoon. I'm Mustafa, an architect. I know there's this breach, there's this gap between the educationists and also the practitioners, in the sense that in this industrial world 4.0, there's always the universities could not deliver the students that come out to actually immediately be on board for industrial. How can we shorten that, how shall I say, gap, so that it is actually at a minimal wastage, and also how can the new education plan fit into this new Industrial Revolution 4.0? Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, may I have a question? This side? This side.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning and Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Norani and I am with UCSI Group SDG office. I am an academia and activist. My first question: how can local and multinational companies in Malaysia collaborate with academia in championing local SDGs parameter to fill up the gap in the international SDG scene? I will give you a bit of background to that first question. And my second question, as an activist, responding to what Mr. Roberto mentioned just now, and to what Tan Sri Zul said about, about timeline. Here we are talking about SDG 4 quality education and, of course, inclusive education. May I speak to be the voice of the voiceless? We talk about refugees contributing to our nation, and right in our country, we have many youth refugees who do not have access to education. What is our timeline, and how can we, as academia, collaborate with the business to create learning institutions while our new government figure out how to adopt, embrace, invite them, leverage the numbers to the many national schools that we have here? Do we not have enough seats for these young people who had to leave their schools and cried for not having education? And I want to respond to Tan Sri Zol's sharing about neglecting Falsafah Pendidikan, 1998. When I heard about UNESCO and Regional Center of Expertise and read their document on education for sustainable development, I cherish that because it is including the cognitive, emotive, and behavioral part of the education. So we celebrate that with SDGs, that transformative education is on board. But my concern is that as a Malaysian, who also represent other high learning institutions, when we send Malaysian students abroad for any sustainability competition, international award, the barometer that are of indigenous concern is not even in the framework. It is very sad when I have students, for example, we are also sending students from UCSI University. There was a time when what our project that we promoted was not even part of the rubric because it is so centric on how we perceive sustainability. I would not like to criticize which centric it is, but if we look at local context, there must be a way that us Malaysians and non-Malaysians here set up a rubric that can voice our voice and our needs to the world. How can the business chambers and the academia, the leaders work together to create a very strong framework and voice this out to the world? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's time for our panelists to respond. Who would like to start first? Prof, would you want to?
There are a couple of very important questions, and I'm not too sure whether I can answer them. But relatively, I think the question that the challenges that we're facing today is basically the kind of education that we want to promote within our own understanding of the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan is far from what has been talked about. For example, I'll give you a simple example. When we talk about the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, we are aiming at the human person. It's not any numbers, ranking, KPIs. Those are not the main issues that we talked about. And this mirrors very well to the 4 pillars of learning of UNESCO. And what are the 4 pillars of learning of UNESCO that we don't even talk about?
I'm
learning
sorry.
to do, learning to know.
Prof, I'm sorry. Maybe my question was a little bit vague, but what I'm trying to get at is that the university, how is it, what kind of challenges had the university faced with respect to acting as an entity, fulfilling the needs of its vision, direction, its business operations, as well as fulfilling the needs of sustainable goals as generally defined, being inclusive, of race, religion, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly my point. When you talk about SDG as far as we're concerned, it's about training a good human person. What is the argument for SDG now? We are moving into another era called the anthropocentric era, which means to say that human beings are now dismantling their own civilization as compared to the old era called the Holocene era. In other words, we've lost the capacity to maintain our own civilization because of the kind of education that we receive. There's a very nice quotation by one very important academic which says that, part of the problems that we have today are because people are having BSc, BA, LLB, whatever, all these degrees that has nothing to do with sustainability at the end of the day. I think we're teaching our people for something, an era that has gone. We are not teaching for people the era that we are meeting in the future, and this is exactly what Noorani is saying. When we sit with United Nations University in 2005, looking at SDG at that particular time, it wasn't SDG then, it was MDG, and ask the question, will university be able to deliver sustainable development in the form that it is now? The flat answer is no. Why? Because the structure is a very industrial structure. That we produce people for employment. Employment for what? For the factory that's already damaged the industry, the environment. We talk about mass production. We talk about consumerism. We talk about all those things that now is against sustainability. And we're producing them for that. We're sustaining the unsustainable. We need to change that. And that is, I think, the biggest thing, because the country is not ready to change. The country is talking about 4IR. I have nothing wrong with the 4IR. But as we talk about 4IR in 2016, under the World Economic Forum, we are also talking about SDG on 2016, issued by United Nations, that our head of our prime ministers has signed on. Now, we talk about 4IR, but how many of us talk about SDG? The first time, I think, in a parliamentarian setting, we talk about SDG. But we're talking about 4IR all the time. Yesterday, there was Sophia somewhere. Who is Sophia? Is it she, is it it, or is it he? So these are issues that we have not talked about. When we talk about SDG, we are not giving enough emphasis on SDG when we talk about the natural inclination of human beings to be good human beings. We are talking about artificial intelligence and dumping millions of it, but we are not enough making human beings the good human beings that we want in terms of education. And this is what the holistic education is all about. And I come back to the 4 pillars of learning. 4 pillars of learning: learning to do, learning to know. We do this all the time. But there's 2 other pillars that we have neglected: learning to be. What is learning to be? Is to understand yourself as a human being. How many of us understand ourselves as a human being? And then when you understand yourself as a human being, then you go to another pillar, learning to live together. Because now we are on the same page as human being, humanity. It doesn't matter you come from Europe, wherever, but you know what is the understanding of human beings. So that is missing now. And as we talk about 4IR, that's going to be neglected even further, because there is no, I'll give you an example for STEM, for example. We detest STEM. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Where is humanity? Where is philosophy? Where is religion? Are these not important? To make you that person before you become the scientist. We need to be the person first before we become an engineer, parliamentarian, minister, whatever. We become the minister, but we are less human. We become an engineer, we become robotic. We become doctors, we become whatever. We lose the human being that ties us all up in a setting that we need now for the world to be saved.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Can I just take another point which I think is very important? I want to talk, when we talk about 4IR, I'm not against 4IR, but why is the Japanese talking about Society 5.0? The most technologically advanced country in the world do not talk about 4IR. They talk about Society 5.0. And if you look at Society 4.0, everything is human-centric. They are not technological-centric. You begin to wonder, a country like Japan wants to talk about technology and technology, but they don't. They talk about how to be good human being, technology as an append. And I'll just give you one last example. A research that was done recently. Talk about digital lifestyle. 10 country studies, 8 of them are developed countries, 2 are developing countries, which happen to be Malaysia and India. The question was this: how many of you cannot live without even looking at your device in a day? That was the question. I know the answer for you. But the global survey says 48% say we cannot live without even looking at the device in a day. 48%. For Malaysian, 70% say we can't even look at a device, we can't even live without looking at a device in a day. 70% out of the global sample say 50%. We are above them by 20%. What is German's number? German is 30%. What is Japanese number? Is 20%. Why is this developed technological country can live without that device? Why can't we? Not even a developed country technologically cannot live with a device. Now, I make a simple analogy. I hope this will stick with you. This analogy is just the technology that you've got is just like a toilet. You want it, you go and used it. After that, you moved out. You want it, you moved it again. And then you used out. But for Malaysian, we live in the toilet. 70% of our time, we live in the toilet because we're so obsessed about it because we don't understand what toilet is all about. And I think this is the duty of the parliamentarian to educate us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tan Sri, for the very philosophical approach. Any other panelists who would like to make quick comments to answer?
Just a quick comment on the answer about the networking thing, about the how to bring the gap closer between university and also the need of the industry and the needs of the university. So at the university now we are working closely with the industry. That's why at the university, the Ministry of Education, we are introducing the concept as 2U, 2I, meaning 2 years at the university and 2 years at the industry, or 3U, 1I, 2 to 3 years at the university and 1 year at the industry, so that they have like both skills and expectation from both sides. That's why we are working now. Thank you very much.
Any other comments?
One final comment. When people think about private sector, it's always about kaching, because we have the so-called money. But some of the companies, yes, because they have invested already what they need to invest, but our pockets are not always deep. So giving to the community does not mean monetary only. We do have in other means, such as employee volunteering, how we can go out and volunteer, and also I think Tan Sri Michael can attest to this, share thought leaderships. I mean, we send our best speakers and share thought leaders and best practices. So I think sustainability or CSR philanthropy is not just about monetary, Tan Sri. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments? No?
Just allow me to make one final comment. I just want to echo what Professor Tan Sri just said, the learning to be. I like that concept very much, and I think it's going to become a very important differentiating factor for societies moving forward, especially with the advent, for example, of artificial intelligence. Human beings need to develop other qualities that differentiate them from, for example, robots or artificial intelligence. So the learning to be is extremely important in terms of what can be done to young generations. It's very important to instill, to educate them to new concepts of consumption, new concepts of production. The concept that a product cannot be thrown away without thinking about the consequences. And this kind of new concepts are extremely important because they will trigger circularity. Circularity is going to be essential because the resources are limited, and circularity needs to be ingrained to the young generations in that manner. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mary, do you have a comment?
Yes, I think one comment was made on our universities not producing enough good human beings. And whereas I understand the comments that have been made, I'm actually more optimistic about Malaysia as a country. I meet many young people in my work coming from universities or not from universities, and especially the young generation tends to be very optimistic. They're active on sustainability, they're active on social change, and I think they will drive the change for good for the country. So I'm actually very optimistic about the current generation coming out of our universities. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we had an interesting session. We've covered a number of issues. We look at a number of SDGs in particular, the SDG 4, SDG 12, SDG 11 were mentioned in the discussions today. I'd like to thank our panelists for being here to share with us their thoughts. In conclusion, I think that this forum has been a very useful forum, and hopefully the forum will lead to stronger partnership between the government, parliament, business, academia, and civil society. And together, I think let's work towards a common goal of ensuring sustainability and inclusivity to ensure that no one is left behind. And I do hope that the APPG that is going to be formed and going to be formalized quickly can take this agenda forward in engaging with civil society as well as with business groups and academia to look at how we can further organize more forums and specific roundtables, as well as carrying out research at the grassroots level, and also to be able to do public advocacy to get more people to be committed to the SDGs. I think one thing that we do hope the APPG can look at is to ensure that the 12 Malaysia plan will give sufficient emphasis to sustainable development goals. And if you can help in lobbying the government to perhaps further focus on the SDGs and the 12 MP, I think that will be very useful for the country. In conclusion, I'd like to thank again the Honorable Speaker for giving us this opportunity to co-organize a forum with Parliament and to allow us this wonderful opportunity of holding the forum here in Parliament. So thank you very much again, Yang Berhormat Dato' Arif. I must also thank the staff of Parliament for the support given to us in organizing this forum. Thank you very much for your presence.
Thank you to the moderator and all the panelists for the insightful session. With that, it marks the end of our forum for today. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite all of you to the cafe at the main block to enjoy lunch. And after the lunch, participants are invited to join a tour to the Dewan Rakyat. Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum and have a nice day.